Hey guys, welcome to Fanfic Fanatics. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku became Lord Drakkon and fell for Melissa? Part 1. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is La Resurrección del Dragon by Vulkyrus_Prime. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Izuku Midoriya was tired. His eyes burned from crying, his throat felt dry, and his body trembled. Not from the cold, but from the despair that consumed him. All Might's words echoed in his head like a cruel, constant sound. You can't be a hero without a quirk. He'd grown up believing in heroes, that justice was for all, that hope was what distinguished the true protectors of society. But in that moment, on that rooftop, with the night breeze hitting his skin, he understood the bitter truth. All Might didn't give people hope, he took it away. He stared at the edge of the building. One step, just one step, and all the pain, the rejection, Bakugo's teasing, the indifference of his classmates, the disappointment in the teacher's eyes. It would all be gone. No one would miss him. No one would remember him. Perhaps his mother would suffer, but in time, he would move on. I'm sorry, Mom, he thought, closing his eyes. Then his phone vibrated in his pocket. A flash of doubt made him pause. With trembling fingers, he pulled out the device and saw the notification in his inbox. Athena01. Thank you for being my friend. I don't know what I'd do without you, Red Heart. Izuku blinked, feeling his breathing become labored. His hands gripped the phone tightly. Athena01. Her only friend besides her mother. She'd met her on a support forum for quirkless people. For months, they'd talked almost every day, sharing their fears, their frustrations, but also their dreams. She was quirkless too, and together they'd promised to support each other. If I leave, what will happen to her? The lump in her throat tightened. She couldn't do that to him. She couldn't do that to them. He backed away from the edge, falling to his knees on the rooftop. Tears streamed down his face again, but this time they were different. They weren't tears of despair, but of relief. Because, for the first time in a long time, he remembered that he wasn't completely alone. He took a deep breath, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his jacket. He didn't know what he would do now. He knew the path he dreamed of following was closed to him. But if the path was blocked, then he would make his own. Izuku stood up. He looked out at the horizon, at the lights of the city that never slept, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a reason to keep going. Because if no one else was going to believe in him, then he himself would. Izuku walked aimlessly through the city, still feeling the weight of his conversation with All Might. His mind was cloudy, but his steps carried him forward, as if his body knew he had to keep going. Then, the piercing cry of someone pleading for help brought him out of his trance. He turned his head and saw a scene that made his blood run cold. Bakugo was trapped by the mud villain. The same villain who had attacked him hours before now enveloped Bakugo, covering him completely, suffocating him with its slimy, suffocating body. The explosion in Bakugo's hand lit up the street, but it was useless. He was trapped, desperate. Izuku looked around. There were heroes, but none of them did anything. They just watched, muttering that they couldn't take any chances given the intensity of Bakugo's outbursts. Seriously? Were they going to just stand there and let him drown? Izuku's heart pounded. He didn't think, he just acted. He picked up a stone from the ground and threw it with all his might, aiming for the villain's eye. Let him go, he shouted at the top of his lungs. The projectile hit the villain directly in the eyeball, who roared in pain, shuddering and letting go of Bakugo enough for him to take a breath. Fucking nerd. Bakugo gasped, catching his breath, and with his free hand he lit a huge explosion, ready to counterattack. I'm going to. But he didn't get a chance. The villain's fury was instantaneous. Blinded in one eye and in a frenzy of rage, he launched himself at them with brutal speed. Before they could react, a wave of mud engulfed them both. No! Izuku screamed, feeling his body being swallowed by the villain's slime. He tried to struggle, but it was useless. He could barely breathe. The smell of decay burned his throat, and the pressure on his chest made him feel like his life was ending at that moment. Bakugo couldn't move either. His explosions were useless without enough oxygen to generate sparks. Izuku felt his consciousness begin to fade. Was this how it would end? Was this how he would die after deciding to move on? No, not yet. Because he had promised to live. Because Athena-01 and her mother were waiting for him. Don't worry, because I'm here. The voice echoed with a power that shook the ground. An instant later, All Might's fist slammed down with brutal force, scattering the mud villain's body like filthy water being expelled through a broken pipe. Izuku felt the slimy grip around him suddenly disappear. He fell to the ground gasping, his body shaking as oxygen refilled his lungs. Beside him, Bakugo was recovering, his jaw clenched and his brow furrowed in frustration. But before Izuku could even process what had happened, he found himself surrounded. What the hell were you thinking? Kamui Woods roared, leaning toward him with fury in his eyes. A quirkless civilian has no business in a situation like this. You could have killed yourself, kid, a paramedic added, checking his condition with a mixture of concern and disapproval. Do you know how irresponsible that was? Izuku tried to answer, tried to tell them that no one else was doing anything, that Bakugo was going to die, that he just wanted to help. But his voice got caught in his throat. Because at the same time they were scolding him, they were praising Bakugo. Amazing, young Bakugo. Your bravery in holding out until the very end was astounding, a hero said, patting him on the back. What a show you put on. Even trapped, you didn't give up, another commented, smiling. Courage? Izuku thought in disbelief. His gaze darkened as he watched the heroes in the crowd surround Bakugo, cheering him on and celebrating his heroism. As if he'd done anything more than just hang on while he drowned. As if he had been the one who saved him. Resentment stabbed into Izuku's chest like a sharp thorn. What kind of world was this? Bakugo, who always looked down on him, who told him to give up, who pushed him and humiliated him, was now a hero hailed for having been a victim. Izuku, who had risked himself to save him, who had taken the only real action in that moment, was treated like a reckless idiot. The injustice of the moment made his stomach turn. Izuku couldn't stand to stay there a second longer. The injustice of the situation weighed heavily on his chest. While Bakugo received praise, he only received reprimands. While the heroes ignored him, All Might barely spoke to him. It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. He turned and walked away, not caring if anyone noticed his absence. He walked aimlessly through the city, just wanting to leave the scene, the screams, the applause for Bakugo behind. But just as he was a few blocks from his apartment, a shadow intercepted him in an alley. Joven Midoriya. Izuku whipped around, his heart pounding. There, in the gloom, was All Might, but not in his muscular form. No, what he saw was the frail, gaunt figure of Toshinori Yagi, the man behind the symbol. A skeletal being, with pale skin and sunken eyes. All Might. Izuku took a step back, surprised. We need to talk. Before he could react, the former hero was already in front of him, his expression stern and his posture imposing despite his fragile condition. What you did today was crazy, young Midoriya, he said in a grave tone. You could have died. Izuku clenched his fists. I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. Bakugo was going to. It wasn't your problem. All Might interrupted firmly, his voice echoing in the alley. You don't have a quirk. You don't have any power. You don't have the tools to be a hero. Izuku felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. But the heroes didn't do anything either, he murmured, his voice shaking. They just stood there, watching him drown. If I didn't do something, Bakugo was going to. Then you should have waited for help to arrive. All Might interrupted him again. The world isn't a fairy tale, young Midoriya. You can't just throw yourself into danger and expect everything to turn out all right. Silence fell over the alley. Izuku lowered his head, his mind clouded with rage, with helplessness, with disgust. His whole body was shaking. Is that what a hero believes? He whispered, his voice filled with bitterness. That people without power should just stand still. All Might frowned. Reality is cruel, young Midoriya. You can't change it with empty wishes. People without quirk can't. Be quiet. Izuku had never felt so much hatred before. His green eyes burned with suppressed fury as he looked at his supposed hero with contempt. You are not a symbol of peace. All Might blinked, surprised by the harshness of her words. You are the symbol of arrogance and hypocrisy. The air seemed to freeze. You told me I couldn't be a hero without a quirk, but you didn't do anything until it was too late. Izuku's hands were shaking. You say people without power can't help, but I was the only one who did something while everyone else watched. His eyes shone with resentment. You're a fraud. All Might's face tensed. For the first time, Toshinori Yagi had nothing to say. Izuku took a deep breath and turned around, walking away from the alley. He didn't wait for an answer. Because, deep down, he knew All Might didn't have won. Izuku left All Might behind without looking back. There was no reason to continue listening to him. There was no reason to continue believing in him. His feet trudged forward, his mind clouded with anger and frustration. Everything he'd experienced today, everything he'd felt, was too much. But his day was not over yet. Because when he turned a corner, a familiar figure was waiting for him. Damn nerd. The tone was the same as always. Disdainful, arrogant. But this time, there was something else in his voice, suppressed anger. Izuku stopped in his tracks. Katsuki Bakugo, his former best friend, his torturer, his executioner. What do you want, Bakugo? Izuku asked in a tired voice, not having the strength to deal with him at the moment. But Bakugo didn't answer him with words. He pushed him hard. Izuku stumbled and fell to the ground, scraping his hands against the asphalt. "Who gave you permission to join my fight, you useless damn guy?" Bakugo roared, his face red with fury. "You think you're a hero for helping me, huh? You think you did me a favor?" Izuku looked up, his green eyes flashing with suppressed fury. Yeah, that simple word made Bakugo tremble with rage. "What did you say, bastard?" "Yes, I helped you, because no one else would." Izuku slowly stood up, not taking his eyes off Bakugo. "Because the heroes just watched. Because the people just stood there watching. Because you were going to die if no one did anything." Bakugo gritted his teeth so hard they felt like they were going to break. "Don't you dare talk to me like that, scum." Izuku waited for the blow. He had waited for it all his life. All his life he had shrunk, he had retreated, he had accepted his place as garbage in Bakugo's eyes. But today was different. Today he was not going to shrink anymore. As Bakugo's fist approached, Izuku did something he'd never done before. He struck first. The impact was direct. A firm, decisive fist struck Bakugo's face, splitting his lip. The silence in the street was absolute. Bakugo took a step back, surprised. He brought a hand to his mouth and pulled it away to see the blood on his fingers. His expression transformed into something much worse than fury. Humiliation. "You," he whispered. Izuku didn't say anything. He just stared at him, the same rage burning inside him. Bakugo clenched his fists. "You don't hit me, nerd." Before Izuku could react, Bakugo raised his hand and an explosion roared into the night. The pain hit him like a wave of fire. His body was thrown backward, and he fell back onto the ground, feeling the skin on his arm burn. He heard Bakugo's laughter. "Look at you, you'll never amount to anything. You're just a bug who should have died on that rooftop." The world began to blur. The sound of Bakugo's laughter faded away. Izuku's vision darkened, the last thing he saw before losing consciousness. It was the night sky, cold and distant. In a dark room inside the Hero Commission building, a group of suited figures watched a screen intently. The video was clear, captured by one of the surveillance drones following All Might. It showed a scene that should never have existed. "Is this a mistake?" one of the council members asked, frowning. The image on the screen said it all. The symbol of peace, Toshinori Yagi, the pillar of society, its ultimate tool for maintaining order, in his weak form. Exposed, vulnerable. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst was what came next. The audio was clear, with each word dripping with venom. "You were the symbol of arrogance and hypocrisy. You were a fraud." Izuku Midoriya, a quirkless boy, had seen the truth with his own eyes. And worse, he despised it. "This is dangerous," said one of the figures. "The boy is harmless, quirkless, he can't do anything. What if he talks?" The silence fell heavily in the room. Finally, a calm but icy voice broke the tension. "We can't allow it." Everyone in the room turned to the figure sitting at the head of the table. The president of the Hero Commission interlaced her fingers and rested her chin on them. Her gaze was cold, calculating, indifferent. "The stability of our society is based on faith in heroes. If people doubt All Might, the system collapses. But he's just a kid. A child with hatred in his heart. A child who saw too much. The council members exchanged glances. They knew what those words meant. The president sighed and leaned back in her chair. Make it look like an accident. Something simple. Something the media doesn't question too much. His gaze hardened. A gas leak in an apartment building. A murmur of approval ran through the room. People will think it was a tragic accident. Nothing more. One of the council members nodded and took out a phone. I'll inform our team. The president gave a slight smile. Make sure there are no survivors. The cold of the asphalt seeped into his skin. Pain was the only thing keeping Izuku conscious. When he opened his eyes, everything was blurry. His limbs felt heavy, his head throbbed with a dull ache, and his body was covered in dust and ash from Bakugo's explosion. Nobody had helped him. No one had stopped to see if he was still alive. No one had considered that a quirkless boy lying in the street deserved even a little attention. With a titanic effort, he stood up. Every step was agony, but he didn't stop. His mind had only one destination: his home. His mother. Mother. The journey was endless. Every block seemed to stretch on. Every street seemed to mock his weakness. But in the end, he made it. When he arrived at his apartment building, a chill ran down his spine. His mother should be home by now. She was always there, waiting for him with a smile, concern in her eyes, and sweet words to ease his suffering. But the door had no lights on. The air was thick. Izuku felt something was wrong. He entered cautiously. The silence was eerie. Mother. There was no response. His feet carried him to the kitchen. And there he saw her. Izuku Midoriya sat at the table, her face pale, her expression frozen in silent terror. There was blood on the floor. A plate of cold food remained on the table, as if dinner had been interrupted. Izuku couldn't breathe. Mother. He ran towards her, but before he could reach her. Boom. The explosion destroyed everything. The world turned into fire, rubble and smoke. The air was ripped from his lungs as his body was thrown brutally. The flames devoured everything around them. The heat burned his skin, the roar of the collapsing structure filled his ears. And in his last moment of consciousness, he understood the truth. This was no accident. This was murder, and the world wanted to make sure he died with her. The void was his punishment. For 200 years, Lord Drakkon had been trapped in a prison beyond time and space. The traitor, the conqueror, the fallen emperor who once nearly bent the multiverse under his thumb. All his power, all the morphers he'd stolen, all the victories he'd racked up, none of it mattered now. The other Rangers had sealed him away, trapping his essence in this eternal limbo. His body was destroyed, his power was weakened, and now it was just an echo, a shadow of what it was. But even so, he didn't give up. Drakkon still had one last purpose. I need a successor. The Ranger's power couldn't be extinguished with him. But there was a problem. Morphers were not compatible with quirks. Mutations, the genetic abilities of the world, contaminated the link to the morphin grid. If he wanted an heir, he had to find someone without a quirk. Someone pure. Someone with the will to fight against a world that despised him. And then, as if fate answered his call, he saw it. Through the cracks of his prison, he felt the presence of a young man. A green-haired boy, desperate and broken, trapped in the worst moment of his life. Izuku Midoriya. He saw it at the exact moment before the explosion. The desperation in his gaze. The helplessness in his posture. Her world had been reduced to ashes. Her mother, murdered. Her future, destroyed. But most importantly, his hatred was real. Interesting. Drakkon whispered, watching the scene with a cruel smile. I know that feeling. The feeling of betrayal, of being despised, of being rejected by a world that never considered him worthy. Izuku Midoriya. He was perfect. Come to me, child. Drakkon extended his essence through the void. Let me show you what true power means. And in the instant before the explosion consumed him, Izuku disappeared. Izuku closed his eyes, waiting for the end. He expected to feel the scorching heat of the explosion devour him. I expected the pain, the darkness. Or perhaps, if fate was merciful, he hoped to be reunited with his mother in a better place. But the end never came. Instead of flames, he was enveloped in abysmal cold. And when he opened his eyes again, he was no longer in his home. It was located in the middle of ruins. A colossal temple, ravaged by time and war. Around it, the futuristic city of Angel Grove sprawled, but not like the one he'd seen in documentaries. No, this city was different. Twisted towers of steel and glass rose on the horizon, covered in red lights and propaganda holograms. Giant statues of warriors in blackened helmets and armor decorated the abandoned streets. Everything lay in ruins, like a monument to a fallen empire. And in the center of that temple, on a throne of cracked stone, stood he. A man with long white hair, dressed in a white suit and gold and black armor, with a lightning bolt emblem on his chest. His presence was commanding, his gaze blazed with a soul-piercing intensity, and when he spoke, his voice resonated with absolute authority. Bienvenido, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku gulped, staggering. Who are you? Where am I? The man smiled. I am Lord Drakkon. Lord Drakkon. The name didn't ring a bell, but the man's presence made him uneasy. Drakkon rose from his throne with an air of dark royalty. I've watched your world, your pain, your suffering. And I've seen how you've been betrayed. Izuku frowned, taking a step back. Drakkon reached out a hand, and in a blink, Izuku saw the truth. A torrent of images, memories and visions hit him like an avalanche. He saw the heroes of his world, comfortable in their false glory. He saw the hero commission, manipulating, controlling, deciding who lived and who died. He saw his mother marked for death, his home destroyed on the orders of the very people who claimed to protect society. He saw Bakugo laughing over his body, All Might looking down on him, a world that never intended to give him a chance. And then, he saw Drakkon's world. A world that was once ruled by a man with absolute power. A conqueror who defeated his enemies, who refused to be chained by false rules, who challenged the multiverse itself. A man who was betrayed by those who claimed to fight for justice. When the visions ended, Izuku fell to his knees, his breathing ragged, his mind on the verge of collapse. Drakkon looked down at him, his smile relentless. Your world is rotten, kid. And you were its latest victim. Izuku felt his chest tighten, his anger bubbling inside him. Everything he believed, everything he stood for, everything he loved, was a lie. All Might, the Commission, the heroes, they abandoned him. They betrayed him. They killed him. He looked up, and for the first time, he looked at Drakkon with a silent question. And the conqueror offered him his hand. Join me. Her voice was like a seductive whisper, a promise of power, of revenge, of a new truth. Leave behind that world that never loved you, and let it show you how to rewrite history. Izuku trembled, because in his heart, he knew he had nowhere else to go back to. The sky above Angel Grove was dead. Where once stars and the moon shone, there was now only a black hole, slowly spinning in the void. It emitted no light, only a dull, cold shadow that tinged the city with a spectral glow. It wasn't natural, it wasn't cosmic, it was a scar on the very fabric of reality. Izuku didn't take his eyes off him. He didn't know why, but that abyss in the sky made him feel a strange connection. As if, somehow, he'd been swallowed up by it too. That's my punishment. Drakkon's voice brought him out of his thoughts. The conqueror looked at the firmament with disdain, his hands behind his back, his posture proud and imposing. A seal, a prison, a cell made of the same power I once ruled. He turned to Izuku, his eyes glowing with an ancient fire. Listen carefully, kid, I've conquered more realities than you can imagine. Drakkon raised his hand and with a snap of his fingers, images floated into the air. Views of distant worlds, realities that had been subdued by his force. Izuku saw entire armies of dark rangers marching on kneeling civilizations. He saw gods fall under the blade of his sword. He saw heroes, those who were once symbols of hope, turn to ashes under his rule. I would never be powerless over anyone again. His voice was a low roar, full of pride and bitterness. I was once like you, Izuku. I believed in an imposed truth. I knelt before the lie of justice. But I learned that the only real justice is the one you take into your own hands. Izuku felt a chill. It wasn't fear, it was something else. Something that awakened within him. But when I was at the height of my power, Drakkon clenched his fists, his tone turning darker, they stopped me. The images changed. Izuku saw Drakkon surrounded by those who stood against him. Rangers from every dimension, heroes from different realities, forces combined with a single purpose, to overthrow the Emperor. He saw the final battle, the moment when his reign was stopped. The Morphin Grid didn't just lock me away. Drakkon looked at Izuku with absolute seriousness. It changed the worlds that remained to be conquered. Izuku felt his heart beat fast. In the world, Izuku. The images were altered. He saw the Earth, his Earth. But something was different. A subtle change, a detour in the story. There were no quirks, Drakkon revealed, with an icy stare. Until they altered the flow of reality. Izuku opened his eyes in surprise. What? Drakkon walked slowly around her. The Morphin Grid, in its desperation to keep me locked up, created something new. He reached out, and the images showed the birth of the quirks. A flash of fragmented morphing energy seeped into their world. A subtle shift, a flaw imposed on the very fabric of their universe. The quirks were not natural. They were a forced mutation. If I ever escaped, Drakkon let out a bitter laugh. The worlds I had yet to conquer would no longer be compatible with the power of the Morphin Grid. Izuku felt his mind spinning. All his life he had believed that quirks were an evolution, a step forward for humanity. But now he knew the truth. They weren't a gift. They were a cage. A cursed cage made to ensure that if Drakkon ever returned he could never regain his power. Izuku felt his blood boil. His entire life had been defined by that lie. Everything she suffered, everything she lost, everything that was taken from her, it was because her world was manipulated from its creation. His mother died for a lie. The heroes betrayed him for a lie. His very existence was shaped to be a mistake. Now you understand, right? Drakkon leaned in slightly, his eyes piercing Izuku's. You and I, we're robbed of our destiny. Izuku didn't respond. Because inside him, something was burning. It was not fear, nor sadness, nor despair. I hate it. For the first time in his life, Izuku Midoriya hated the entire world. Izuku clenched his fists. The weight of the truth crushed him. Everything in his life had been a lie. The quirks, the heroes, the very universe he lived in, none of it was natural. Everything had been manipulated to ensure that Drakkon could never regain his power. But Izuku wasn't going to sit idly by. I want to go back. His voice sounded firm, determined. Drakkon watched him curiously. Return. To what, child? Your mother is dead. Your home was burned to the ground. The heroes will never accept you. Izuku raised his head, his gaze burning. I still have Athena 01. Drakkon frowned. And what's so special about that girl? Izuku took a deep breath. She's quirkless too. For the first time, Drakkon's gaze showed a hint of surprise. Izuku continued, without hesitation. She and I met at a forum. We understood each other. We promised to support each other. He remembered the messages, the shared sleepless nights, the moments when, despite being in the dark, Athena 01 had been a beacon in his life. We agreed to meet this weekend for the first time. And I want you to know the truth. He turned fully towards Drakkon, fire in his eyes. I want him to know the truth about quirks. About heroes. About everything. The conqueror crossed his arms, studying him. Wow. Even after losing everything, you still want to fight. No. Izuku shook his head. I want revenge. A heavy silence settled between them. Finally, Drakkon let out a low laugh. Kid, entering this world was easy. His eyes flashed with a dangerous intensity. When I saved you from the explosion, your existence was sucked away here. But getting out, that's a different story. Izuku felt a chill run down his spine. What do you mean? Drakkon walked slowly, his cape billowing behind him. This dimensional prison was specifically designed to contain me. I'll never be able to get out. His words were cold, definitive. Me too. Drakkon stopped and smirked. You're too weak to go out on your own. Izuku felt his anger boiling, but he didn't argue. He knew that, at this moment, Drakkon was right. He had no power. I didn't have the tools. But it didn't mean I couldn't get them. Izuku looked up, his determination unwavering. Then let's go out together. Drakkon raised an eyebrow. Together. If the prison is made to trap you, then what we need is for it not to recognize us. An icy silence took over the place. Drakkon watched the boy intently, assessing him. And then, a smile appeared on his face. I've waited 200 years for someone like you. He leaned slightly towards Izuku, his eyes flashing with dark purpose. So listen, kid, if you want to get out of here, we'll have to become one. Izuku didn't hesitate. His mind was clear. If they couldn't come out separately, then they would become one. If it meant gaining the power that had been denied to him. If that meant being able to show everyone that I wasn't useless, that I wasn't a hindrance. If it meant he could destroy the lie of the quirks and reveal the hidden truth of the world. Then he would give up his body without hesitation. Let's do it. His voice was firm. Drakkon smiled, a gleam of approval in his golden eyes. You've got guts, kid. The conquistador walked toward him, his figure casting a shadow over the boy. If I could have taken your body by force, I would have done it without asking you. His tone had no arrogance, only brutal sincerity. But after 200 years in this prison, I'm too weak. Drakkon raised his hand, his palm covered in cracks of flickering energy, as if his very essence were crumbling. I'm disappearing. Izuku saw how Drakkon's armor had hairline fractures, as if his body was made of glass on the verge of shattering. Every day that passes here, my existence fades further. If we don't do this now, soon there'll be nothing left of me. Izuku felt his breathing become labored. He too had been on the edge of nowhere. He too had felt what it was like to be trapped, waiting to disappear. Then we don't have time to waste. Drakkon smiled. Exactly. The air was charged with energy. Drakkon extended both hands and the broken morphin grid responded to his call. Thunderstorms formed in the sky. Red lightning danced over the ruins. The air vibrated with an ancient and forbidden power. We both have the same goal, Izuku Midoriya. We both want to rewrite a world that betrayed us. Drakkon raised his arm and extended 2 fingers towards Izuku. Let us become one. Izuku didn't back down. He did not hesitate. If this was what it took to get out of here, if this was what it took to destroy the system that had condemned him, then I accepted. Yeah, the energy burst. A vortex of power enveloped them both. Izuku felt his body being pulled, torn apart, and rebuilt all at the same time. It wasn't painful. It was liberating. Drakkon's memories, his knowledge, his experience, it all poured into her mind. Izuku's thoughts, his fury, his despair, intertwined with Drakkon's. And at that moment, they stopped being two. Izuku Midoriya, Tommy Oliver, Drakkon. They became something new. It was no coincidence. It wasn't a mistake. It was fate. The universe itself had conspired so that at the exact moment when they were both on the verge of extinction, they would meet. Izuku Midoriya, Tommy Oliver, Drakkon. 2 souls scarred by the world's injustice. 2 beings who should have been gods, but the Morphin Grid stole that right from them. And now, they were back to claim him. The prison exploded. The infinite void that had contained him for 200 years was torn like a paper veil. Izuku felt his new body stabilize, a titanic force coursing through him. He wasn't just Izuku Midoriya anymore. He was no longer a simple quirkless child. It was something else. And with him, the colossi awoke. The air trembled. The earth shook. From the depths of the dimensional prison, 3 mechanical beasts emerged roaring with renewed fury. Serpentera, the Tigerzord and the Dragonzord. The sky lit up with purple and red lightning as the 3 titanic machines, symbols of a forgotten power, breathed again. Izuku felt his connection with them. They weren't just weapons. They were part of him. The Morphin Grid thought it could bury us. Izuku closed his eyes, feeling the electricity vibrate across his skin. They feared us. They sealed us. They stole our right to be gods. Izuku opened his eyes, and they shone with the light of the storm. Now, they'll understand. The shadows of the multiverse felt his return. And heroes and villains alike, in every world, knew that the order was about to change. Melissa Shield left her apartment with a shy smile. It was rare for her to feel nervous about a date, but this time was different. Finally, after months of talking online, I would meet Starboy 15. Your best friend on the quirkless support forum. The only person who really understood her. She made sure she looked her best. Nothing too flashy, but enough to make her look pretty. A light sweater and a comfortable skirt, with her golden hair neatly combed. It had been a couple of years since her last date with a guy, and they had all ended the same way. The first few minutes were perfect, until they discovered he had no quirk. Then the smiles would become awkward, the kind gestures would become distant, and in the end, they would just leave her. "I don't care about your personality, but I need someone strong by my side. Don't take this the wrong way, but I can't imagine a future with someone without a quirk. It would be hard to raise kids like that, wouldn't it?" Melissa had already grown accustomed to disappointment. But today was different, because Izuku was like her. He didn't have to pretend. He didn't have to explain himself. He didn't have to justify his existence. In him, she had found someone who shared her pain, her anger, but also her hope. Their friendship was not a lie. And now, finally, I would meet him in person. The cafe by the park was a quiet spot, with a beautiful view of the flowering trees. Perfect for a heartfelt conversation. Melissa smiled, feeling her heart beat with excitement. But I didn't know the truth. I didn't know Izuku would never arrive. I didn't know that, at that moment, the world I knew was about to change forever. Melissa stirred her coffee slowly with a spoon, checking her phone for the umpteenth time. Every minute that passed, I checked the screen, hoping to see a new message from Starboy 15. Nothing. They had agreed to meet at 5 p.m. at the cafe by the park. It was already 8:30 p.m. His hands trembled slightly as he typed another message. "Melissa. Are you okay? I've been here for a while. If you had any problems, let me know." The screen remained silent. Her lips trembled, but she refused to shed tears. It wasn't the first time she'd been dumped on a date. But this time, I wanted to believe I was different. Izuku wasn't like the others. She'd met him on the forums when they were both at their lowest point, when no one else understood them. They'd talked for months, shared secrets, laughs, dreams. He wasn't like the others. "Excuse me, miss." Melissa blinked and looked up. The coffee shop barista smiled at her kindly, but with an apologetic tone in his voice. "We're about to close." Melissa gripped the phone tightly. "Oh, yeah, sorry." She quickly stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked out, feeling a void in her chest. The night's cold was more frigid than I expected. She walked back to her apartment in silence, hugging herself. I couldn't be mad at him. Something must have happened. Maybe he was late. Maybe he missed the bus. Maybe he forgot. Maybe he didn't want to meet her. That thought hurt him more than he expected. When she got to her apartment, she left her bag on the couch and turned on the TV, hoping to distract herself with something. But what he saw on the screen, it took his breath away. Tragedy struck Musudafu last night when a gas explosion destroyed a residential building. The image on the screen showed the site of the explosion. Ashes, charred remains, rubble of what was once a home. Melissa felt her body freeze. Among the confirmed victims are a mother and son, identified as Inko and Izuku Midoriya. The image of his friend appeared on the screen. His face, his hair, Starboy 15. The coffee cup fell from his hands and shattered on the floor. No, her lips trembled. No, no, no. His mind refused to process it. It couldn't be true. He couldn't be dead. But the television didn't lie. The news continued with details about the alleged gas leak. About how there were no survivors. About how the cause was still under investigation. Melissa didn't hear anything else. He only saw Izuku's image. And his world shattered into pieces. David Shield was a busy man. From his laboratory on Island, his time was always filled with research, meetings, and projects to advance heroic technology. But none of that mattered at the moment. Because a week had gone by without receiving a single message from his daughter. At first, he thought she was busy with her studies or some personal project. But after 2 days of no return calls, he began to worry. By the time 5 days had passed and there was still no sign of Melissa, he knew something was wrong. That's why he stood at the door of his apartment in Musudafu, frowning as he knocked louder for the 4th time. "Melissa, it's Dad. Open the door." Nothing. David sighed and took out the emergency key he had given him months ago. When he opened the door, a strong, rancid stench hit him. His heart raced. Melissa. He rushed in and was met with a sight that made his stomach turn. The apartment was a mess. The table had plates of untouched food. The sofa was covered with wrinkled blankets and papers scattered on the floor. But the worst was ahead. Melissa sat at her desk, completely motionless. Her hair was dirty, her clothes wrinkled, and her skin pale. He hadn't slept, he hadn't eaten, he hadn't showered all week. His eyes, empty and reddened, were fixed on his laptop screen. David approached with a heavy heart. Melissa, she didn't react. He just kept staring at the screen. David looked over her shoulder and saw what had her trapped. It was a forum, the quirkless forum. At the top of the chat, his last message to someone with the username Starboy15 remained unanswered. David swallowed. Melissa moved the cursor slowly and typed a new message. Melissa. Izuku, please tell me this is a joke. David felt his heart break. Melissa blinked, as if barely noticing his presence. His voice came out broken. Dad, the world wouldn't be so cruel, would it? David didn't know what to answer. Melissa looked down, her trembling hands gripping her knees. He can't be dead, not without me having met him in person. David hugged her without saying anything. And for the first time all week. Melissa burst into tears. David was not a man easily left speechless. He was one of the world's greatest scientists, an innovator, a man whose mind could analyze, break down, and solve problems with surgical precision. But at that moment, I had no idea what to do. His daughter was in his arms, crying like he hadn't seen her cry in years. Melissa had always been strong. When several colleges rejected her for being quirkless, she accepted with a hollow smile and said she'd move on. When he became the laughingstock of some of his colleagues on Island, he didn't shed a single tear. Even as a child, when she lost her mother at the age of 5, she had cried, yes, but never like this. This wasn't just sadness. It was despair. It was loss. It was absolute emptiness. Melissa. David had no words that could heal what he felt. He just held her tighter, letting his daughter sob into his chest. Melissa's pain was a cruel reminder that sometimes the world was ruthless to those who least deserved it. Finally, as her crying began to subside, Melissa spoke, her voice breaking. Dad, the world can't be that cruel, right? David swallowed. It shouldn't be, he whispered. But sometimes it is. Melissa clung to his shirt. He was my only friend. He understood me. His voice broke again. I never even met him in person. David closed his eyes tightly. Melissa didn't deserve this. Izuku Midoriya didn't deserve this. And worst of all, there was something that didn't make sense. The official story was that the explosion in the building was an accident, but David had worked with safety systems long enough to know that gas leaks didn't explode like that. And now, seeing the state of his daughter, I needed answers. For now, she could only hold Melissa, allowing her to pour out everything her heart had kept silent. 6 months later, 6 long months since Melissa's world shattered. His condition had worsened so much that David had no choice. He had to admit her to a psychiatric hospital. Every time I visited her, I found her the same. Sitting on the bed, staring blankly, unreacting, as if waiting for the universe to give her an answer that would never come. Doctors told him he had entered a state of catatonic depression. That his mind had disconnected from the world because reality was too unbearable. David refused to accept that this would be his daughter's life forever. Therefore, he did not sit idly by. During those 6 months, he used every resource at his disposal. He hacked, researched, bribed, and manipulated. He used Island's advanced technology to infiltrate databases that were beyond the reach of any normal citizen. And finally, he found what he was looking for. The confidential files of the Heroes Commission. What he discovered left him frozen. Executed. For the sake of peace. Izuku Midoriya and Izuku Midoriya were intentionally killed. David, a man who had dedicated his life to the advancement of heroes, felt an indescribable rage. They had killed an innocent mother and son, just because they knew too much. And all to protect the lie on which society was based. David felt nauseous. He always believed in heroes. He always trusted the system. But now, he knew the truth. And if I could prove this to Melissa, maybe she could find a reason to come back. With the files in hand, he prepared to reveal everything. But then, they arrived. The Hero Commission stormed his lab on Island before he could act. They entered without warning, with cold and calculating looks. And they were not alone. David felt a chill run down his spine when he saw who was coming with them. Toshinori Yagi, All Might, the hero who had been his friend for years, the man he trusted blindly, the symbol of peace. David felt his world crumble. Because when he looked at All Might's face, he didn't see confusion, he didn't see anger, he only saw resignation. As if I knew this was going to happen. As if I had always known. The president of the commission was the first to speak. David Shield. His voice was calm, emotionless. You've been investigating things you shouldn't have. David gritted his teeth. So it's true. Is all this true? The president did not deny anything. He just bowed his head slightly. Peace has a price, David. David felt his anger boil inside him. They killed a child. They killed his mother. All because of your damn lie. He turned to All Might. Toshinori, tell me you didn't know this. Tell me you didn't know they killed a kid who just wanted to be a hero. But All Might didn't respond. There were no denials, no explanations. He just closed his eyes and let out a heavy sigh. And at that moment, David understood. You knew it. All Might opened his eyes, but he couldn't meet her gaze. David felt his throat tighten. You knew they were going to kill him, and you did nothing. Toshinori Yagi, the symbol of peace, bowed his head. I had no choice. David felt his stomach turn. You had no choice. He was a child, Toshinori. All Might clenched his fists. If the truth were known, society would collapse. David let out a bitter laugh. So what? Does that justify it? The president of the commission took the floor again. Understand this, David. It's not personal. It's for the good of the world. David looked at her with absolute hatred. They have no idea what they've done. The president's eyes flashed coldly. Yes, we know. And with a signal of his hand, the commission agents advanced towards him. Toshinori Yagi had never felt so dirty. He had learned to live with the weight of his decisions. He had accepted that peace required sacrifices. He had justified every compromise, every omission, every tragedy as a necessary evil. But this time it was different. David was dead. His lifeless body lay on the laboratory floor, surrounded by burned documents and smashed equipment. Toshinori wasn't the one who shot, he wasn't the one who gave the order. But he allowed it to happen. Same as with Izuku Midoriya. He swallowed, feeling his stomach turn. For months, it had been repeated that what happened to young Midoriya was a tragedy, but a necessary one. He had told himself that if the truth came out, the whole world would fall apart. That if society doubted heroes, everything it had built would collapse. That's why he did nothing when the commission made the decision, and he didn't speak out when an innocent child was murdered. But now, seeing the corpse of his best friend on the ground, the price of peace felt higher than ever. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes tightly. I couldn't turn back. Not now. Not after allowing two people he cared about to die for the cause. Not after having sacrificed David. The president of the commission approached him calmly. Don't worry, All Might. Everything's taken care of. His voice was cool and professional. As if this were just another day at the office. Toshinori did not respond. About Shield's daughter, the president continued, everything is already arranged. She will be taken into your custody. He looked up, surprised. The world can't know what happened here. Officially, David died in an accident. Melissa Shields is his only immediate family, and now he'll be in her care. Toshinori felt the world grow heavier on his shoulders. Under my care. The president nodded with a fake smile. You are the symbol of peace. What better way to ensure that young Melissa is in good hands? Toshinori stared at the ground, unable to respond. David Shield was his friend. They had spent years together on Island, working side by side on hero technology. David knew the truth, and died for it. And now, he was going to take care of his daughter. As if that could fix what he had done. The commission president gave him one last look before leaving. It's the only thing you can do for him now. As the door closed behind her, Toshinori felt like she could barely breathe. Melissa was in a catatonic state. His mind had collapsed after Izuku's death. And now, he had to be her guardian. His only consolation. Her last connection with David. But Toshinori knew that if she ever found out the truth she would hate him more than he hated himself at that moment. The battle in Deku City had reached its climax. Destro and Shigaraki faced off in a clash of wills, each representing the supremacy of their faction. The Meta-Human Liberation Army versus the League of Villains. But when the city lay in ruins and Destro admitted defeat, bending his army to Shigaraki's will, the whole world shook. A rumble shook the earth, not just in Japan. In every corner of the world. For an instant, the sun disappeared. In its place, a black hole slowly rotated in the sky, swallowing the light and projecting an infinite shadow on the earth. Time seemed to stop. Heroes around the world felt a chill run down their spines. Villains looked to the sky in awe and terror, and from the depths of the void emerged four figures. First, the roar of a mechanical god broke the silence. Serpentera, a black draconic titan with golden highlights, his eyes glowing with red energy as his enormous silhouette covered the sky. Every movement he made in the air made the ground tremble. Then two legendary guardians joined him. The Tiger Zord and the Dragon Zord. The first, a white colossus in the shape of a tiger, with its claws and fangs gleaming, radiating an ancestral energy. The second, a green titan with the appearance of a sea dragon, its golden chest glowing as its tail swished with a destructive presence. The energy in the air became oppressive, but then the fourth figure appeared and reality itself bowed before its presence. Among the titans, floating with an aura that distorted existence, a figure slowly descended. His white suit with black and gold details, his armor, imposing, reflected the light of the red lightning that now covered the sky. His helmet, shaped like a dragon's jaws, hid his face, but his mere existence crushed the world with its power. Lord Drakkon had returned, and with him, the history of the world would be rewritten. Heroes across the planet felt his presence. The Hero Commission froze in terror. Shigaraki looked up at the sky, a demented grin on his face. "And who the hell are you?" Drakkon descended slowly, with absolute calm. As his feet touched the ground, the earth itself cracked. He looked up, and with a voice full of power and contempt, he answered. "I am the truth that has been hidden from you. I am the god that your world tried to erase. I am Lord Drakkon, and this world is mine." The mountains around Deku City trembled with Gigantomashia's every step, the 30-meter colossus advancing with unwavering determination. His mission was clear: reach his teacher. All for one, the demon of society, the king of the shadows, now resided within Shigaraki. And Gigantomashia felt his call. The UA students were trying to stop their march. They threw everything they had at him, trying to delay him. The sedatives, the traps, the resistance of Mount Lady. But in an instant, everything changed. The sky darkened, a deathly silence fell over the battlefield, and then he felt true terror. Not because of him, but because of his teacher. Something had come to Shigaraki. Something with such immense power, so overwhelming, that even All for One, the most feared man in the world, was in danger. Gigantomashia roared in fury. He couldn't stop. It couldn't fail. Without hesitation, he grabbed Mount Lady with one hand and tossed her into the air like a rag doll. The mountains around him split under the force of his rush. I had to get to the city. He had to save his teacher. But he didn't, because the moment he entered the valley, the shadow of a titan fell upon him. The air vibrated with a roar that shook the earth. And before I could react, Serpentera fell on him. The giant paw of the black mechanical dragon descended from the skies. 500 meters of pure colossal power. The ground exploded into a devastating crater as Serpentera crushed Gigantomashia like an insect. The 30-meter titan, the monster that no one could stop, was buried under the dragon's immense paw. His body creaked. The air escaped from his lungs. For the first time in his existence, Gigantomashia felt what it was like to be insignificant. The heroes, the villains, everyone who witnessed the event was in shock. It hadn't been a fight, it hadn't been a battle, it was an execution. Then, Serpentera roared, not of victory but of absolute dominance. The mountain winds stopped, the skies trembled, and in the distance, Lord Drakkon heard the roar of his beast. Under his helmet, he smiled, because this world believed in false gods, worshipped lies, because this world was his. Shigaraki roared with hatred. Gigantomashia's death filled him with pure rage, but before he could act, his mind clouded. All for One's voice echoed in his head, taking control. Don't get carried away by emotion, Tamura. His hands shook with fury, but his will was suppressed. All for One took command. The power of the man in front of him was overwhelming. Lord Drakkon's mere existence crushed reality itself. But All for One was the symbol of fear. He was not afraid of the unknown. He wouldn't let Gigantomashia's death make him doubt his supremacy. If this man had such inhuman power, he would steal it. I would make it my own. He reached out his hand. All for One's ability activated, an invisible force extending like dark tentacles toward Drakkon. Quirks were his domain. If this man had a quirk, no matter how strong it would be his now. But Drakkon didn't resist, he just smiled, and at that moment the universe itself shuddered. The power-stealing ability touched Drakkon's armor, but instead of absorbing its energy, it started a chain reaction. Shigaraki's eyes widened in horror as his quirk began to burn from within. The morphin grid and quirks were incompatible. Like water and oil, like a virus trying to devour the very immune system that would annihilate it in response. The infinite power of the morphin grid reacted violently with the energy of the quirks and burned them. Every quirk All for One had stolen over the decades, every ability he had accumulated in his life, every vestige of his being, all turned to ash in an instant. His body was destroyed before he could understand what had happened. Tamura, Shigaraki and All for One disappeared. There were no screams, no battle, just ashes floating in the wind. The battlefield fell into absolute silence. The members of the Metahuman Liberation Army and the League of Villains looked on in horror. The being they had followed disappeared without a trace. Drakkon lowered his hand slowly, satisfied. Quirks. He spat out the word as if it were poison. Fragile powers, corrupted by the lies of this world. He looked at the villains with utter contempt. I will show you what true power is. His gaze turned to the sky, to the heroes who had surely seen everything from their monitors, the Hero Commission, All Might. He knew that right now the whole world was watching him, and that was exactly what he wanted, because the age of quirks had come to an end and the age of Lord Drakkon had just begun. The world watched in fear. Heroes, villains, governments, nations, all witnessed the arrival of the conqueror of the multiverse. The man who had effortlessly annihilated Gigantomashia and Shigaraki. The live broadcast from Deku City showed the towering figure of Lord Drakkon, his white, gold, and black armor gleaming in the artificial light of the disaster. The dragon-shaped helmet hid his face, but his voice resonated with absolute authority. Listen carefully, inhabitants of this world. The weight of his presence caused even the satellites broadcasting the event to interfere with the overwhelming energy around him. My name is Lord Drakkon. The silence was total. I am the conqueror of the multiverse. His tone wasn't arrogant, it wasn't boastful, it was a matter of fact, the words of a being who knew what supremacy was. Drakkon reached out and, with a slow gesture, crushed Shigaraki's ashes under his gauntlet. Serpentera did the same to Gigantomashia's mangled corpse, as if the two greatest monsters in the world were nothing more than dust beneath her power, and then she revealed the truth. Did you think your quirks were a blessing? The cameras focused on his imposing figure. No. His voice became mocking, as if the very idea amused him. Your abilities, this supposed evolution, are nothing more than a desperate defense against me. The whole world held its breath. Drakkon pointed to the sky, to the same black hole that was still slowly spinning in the firmament. The morphin grid altered them. Their genetics were changed, not because they were special, but because the universe feared what they would do when they returned. Heroes around the world watched the broadcast in horror. Drakkon's words shattered centuries of belief. Quirks weren't a miracle, they were a cage, a restraining measure to ensure that if he ever escaped, this world couldn't sustain his power. But now he was back, and the 200 years the morphin grid had bought them had been wasted. Drakkon raised his arms, spreading them as if encompassing the entire planet. Time was their ally, but they wasted it. The governments, the Heroes Commission knew what this meant. His time was up. Drakkon looked at the camera with a smile hidden under his helmet, everyone listening to his voice, the conqueror who had crushed the monsters of his world with ease. But this time, he wasn't speaking to the heroes, he wasn't speaking to the governments, he wasn't speaking to the villains, he was speaking to the quirkless, the outcasts, the forgotten, those society discarded as useless. Drakkon raised his hand, the energy of the morphin grid vibrating around him. Think what you want about my actions. His voice was clear, unwavering. Hate my power, fear my return, curse my existence. His fist slowly closed. But don't doubt reality. The words resonated in the hearts of all who heard it, especially those without a quirk. The claim has already begun. The broadcast showed real-time images. All over the world, the quirkless looked at their screens with awe and terror, but above all with hope. And they can't stop us now. The streets of Japan, the United States, Europe, Africa, and Asia began to vibrate with a new movement. Those who had previously lived in the shadows, those who had always been considered weak and inferior, now had a leader. Drakkon held out his hand firmly. For centuries, we've been called mistakes, treated like genetic flaws, trampled on, and made to believe we're worthless, but that's over. The energy of the morphin grid blazed with fury. I'm like you, I'm quirkless, I was impotent. Images from the cities showed the world's forgotten people looking up, some with tears in their eyes, others with expressions of disbelief. And many with fists clenched. Drakkon lowered his gaze, his voice now deeper, more personal. I swore that I would never again be under anyone's power but my own. Now, I offer you the same. The world fell silent, because the invitation was clear. This wasn't just a speech, it wasn't just a show of force, it was a call to war, it was the beginning of a new world. The heroes, the governments, the Hero Commission, knew what this meant. The quirkless of the world had found their emperor and the age of false gods was coming to an end. World leaders panicked, and Hero Commission headquarters around the globe attempted to disrupt the broadcast. The best hackers in the world, the most advanced defense systems, the most powerful technologies they had, nothing worked. Drakkon's Zords were centuries ahead of any system on this world. Emergency signals were jammed, satellites were hacked in real time. Transmissions that attempted to silence him were instantly rewritten. Lord Drakkon was everywhere, his message could not be stopped, his voice shook the entire world, not just the quirkless. Scientists from all branches of science were stunned. The theory of evolution had been destroyed in seconds. The system on which biology, genetics, and human history were based collapsed with a few words. Governments that treated the quirkless as second-class citizens, as slaves in all but name, now feared the coming revolt. Heroes and villains felt something worse than fear. They felt the truth. They were no longer special. For the first time in their lives they were the mistake. They were the anomaly in existence. They were the virus designed to contain a being that had now broken its chains. If Drakkon had been the same man he once was, this world would have been crushed by now, set as a brutal example for any other reality that tried to challenge him. But the fusion with Izuku Midoriya changed him. He wasn't Drakkon, he wasn't Izuku, he was more than them, something new, someone who not only conquered and crushed, but liberated. I have returned to claim what has been denied to us. His tone was still firm, but it was no longer just that of a conqueror, it was that of a redeemer. This world never loved us, it made us believe we were broken, it told us we were mistakes. The images of quirkless being discriminated against, oppressed, despised, the laws that kept them at a disadvantage, the documents hidden by the Hero Commission. Everything was shown to the world in real time. Drakkon unmasked society in a single move and then showed the final truth. We are not broken, we are the only real thing. The silence of the world was sepulchral. The quirkless stared at the screens with tears in their eyes. For the first time in their lives they felt seen. Drakkon reached out a hand, as if he could touch each of them. They've been crushed for too long. The air vibrated. His next sentence was a declaration of war. Join me. His voice became dark, strong, resonant. And let us reclaim this world together. The world fell into chaos. Governments trembled, heroes feared, the quirkless rose, but in a small psychiatric hospital in Japan, in a lonely room where time seemed to have stopped, Melissa kept staring into the void. Her tired gaze, lost in an abyss that no one else could see. 18 months since her mind shut down, since the weight of the truth was too much, since Izuku never showed up for his date with her, since her only connection to the world was broken. The doctors said there was no hope, that her conscience had closed in on itself, her mind refused to process the pain to protect itself, and she would never be the same again. But that day everything changed, because in the infinite void that I had observed for months, for the first time in all this time something appeared. A towering figure, dressed in white, black, and gold, a presence that crushed reality itself, a voice that echoed in the back of her mind. Melissa. Her heart stopped. She knew that voice. Her body, weak from months of inactivity, shuddered. Her brain, asleep in its own isolation, began to awaken. Because his name was not said by a stranger. Izuku. It was him. Melissa blinked. For the first time in months, her fingers moved, her body reacted. Drakkon's voice echoed in her head once more. I haven't forgotten about you. His breathing became labored. She wasn't alone. The world hadn't forgotten her. Izuku hadn't forgotten her. For the first time in 18 months Melissa smiled. Her mind started working again. Deep inside her a new flame began to burn. Lord Drakkon turned slowly. His imposing figure rose above the rubble of Deku City as his gaze, hidden beneath his helmet, fell upon the 4 heroes who dared to challenge him. Endeavor, Mirko, Mirio and Katsuki Bakugo. 4 of the strongest heroes, their gazes filled with rage. With defiance. To them, Drakkon was no different from any other villain, just another madman with delusions of grandeur, another monster that needed to be stopped. That arrogance was his biggest mistake. Drakkon exhaled with amusement. Ah, yes, the resistance of the heroes. His voice was deep, resonant. They are always the first to cling to their lies. Bakugo stepped forward, sparks exploding in his hands. You're nothing more than a clown in a stupid costume. Mirko cracked his knuckles, a ferocious grin on his face. If you think you can come here and do whatever you want, I'll beat the shit out of you. Mirio, with his characteristic optimism, raised his fists. I don't know who you are, but I can't let you continue with this. Endeavor, number 1, lit his fire, his body burning like a raging sun. I don't care what kind of power you have, you're just another villain, I'll crush you. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Drakkon laughed. It wasn't a loud laugh, it wasn't exaggerated mockery, it was a low, deep, dangerous sound, a sound of absolute contempt. That arrogance. The air became heavy. It's what I enjoy crushing the most. The world shook, and in that instant Izuku Midoriya understood the power that was now his, not as a quirkless dreamer, not as the once humiliated child, but as an unstoppable force. As the conqueror of the multiverse, as Lord Drakkon, the heroes, in their ignorance, had no idea what they were about to face. Mirio Tagata activated permeation the instant Drakkon moved, but it was no use. Drakkon's punch reached him anyway, the gauntlet-covered fist impacting his face with brutal force. Mirio felt his skull vibrate from the impact, his body thrown like a projectile against the rubble, and when he stood up, his vision was blurred. How? He stammered, putting his hand to his jaw. If it weren't for One for All, that blow would have ripped his head off. Reality distorted around him. Drakkon was fast, too fast an endeavor. Mirko and Bakugo understood it at the worst possible moment. Drakkon didn't stop, didn't give them time to breathe, didn't let them adapt. In the blink of an eye, he was upon them. Endeavor roared, unleashing a burst of flames. Vanishing fist. Mirko spun around, kicking with all her might. Full moon. Bakugo flew into the air, spinning in a whirlwind of explosions. Howitzer impact. The joint attack shook the earth, but Drakkon didn't move. He didn't even try to dodge. When Endeavor's fire covered him, he simply passed through it without flinching. When Mirko's kick was aimed at his head, he raised a hand and stopped it with 2 fingers. When Bakugo spun at full speed, Drakkon intercepted him with a single kick to the abdomen. Bakugo spat out blood, his body bent in the air. Mirko tried to break free, but Drakkon spun on his axis and slammed her to the ground. Endeavor, with his eyes wide open, watched everything in horror. Impossible. Drakkon moved with absolute perfection. His blows were calculated, his speed was inhuman, his strength was monstrous, but the worst thing was that he was playing with them. He wasn't fighting seriously. Is this all the heroes can do? Drakkon let out a sigh of disappointment. And to think that this world believed you were the pinnacle of power. His voice was full of mockery. Pathetic. Bakugo tried to stand up, but his legs were shaking. Mirko gritted his teeth in fury, but his arm didn't respond. Endeavor was still processing what had just happened. Mirio, watching everything from his position, realized something terrifying. He's dominating us, with ease. It was as if they were fighting a being from another plane of existence. Drakkon looked down at his own fists. He could feel it. Izuku could feel it. This power was his, and the heroes who once despised him were completely helpless. Prominence burn. Endeavor roared with fury, unleashing the hottest flames his body could produce. Fire burned through the air, the ground melted beneath his feet, and the explosion turned the battlefield into an absolute hell, but Drakkon just walked through it, unhurried, effortless. The flames, which could reduce any human being to ashes, did nothing to him. His footsteps echoed among the crackling of the fire. Endeavor felt fear. And before he could react, Drakkon moved, his fist slamming into Endeavor's windpipe with surgical precision. The number one hero fell to his knees, choking, his breath suddenly cut off, his lungs struggling to draw air, his throat closing in a spasm of pain. He was defenseless. Drakkon didn't even give him another glance, he simply ignored him. Because he was no longer a threat, Mirko took advantage of the opening, jumping with all the strength of his legs. The strength of a wild animal, of a fearless fighter, but Drakkon was faster, much faster. His foot slammed into her knee before she could push off, the impact shattering the joint like glass. Mirko roared in pain, but Drakkon wasn't finished, moving like a storm of pure destruction, a fist to the other leg, a blow to the spine, an elbow to the ribs. Every blow was precise and calculated, every bone in Mirko shattered in a blinding combination of blows. When it was over, she could no longer move, she just lay on the ground, breathing heavily, Drakkon leaning slightly over her. Admit it. His tone was cold. You also know that you never had a chance. Mirko gritted his teeth in fury but couldn't respond, his body no longer obeyed him. Bakugo saw Endeavor drowning on the ground and Mirko motionless, broken. Damn bastard. He launched a massive blast, using his momentum to attack him from a blind angle. If his distraction was enough, if he could find an opening he could make at least a scratch. But Drakkon wasn't a simple villain, he wasn't a confident idiot, he didn't let his guard down, because in his world, surprise attacks were his routine, his fighting instinct was used to it. So when Bakugo approached, Drakkon simply grabbed him by the head with one hand and slammed him into the ground brutally, the impact opening a crater in the earth. Bakugo stood still, the dust slowly dissipated. Drakkon straightened up, looking at the defeated bodies of the heroes. They were on the ground and they hadn't even made him sweat. Under his helmet, he smiled, because this world believed that heroes were invincible. They worshipped false gods and now, everyone was seeing the truth. Their gods were made of clay and he had come to overthrow them. Mirio lashed out in fury, anger blazing in his gaze, will trembling in his chest. Drakkon's every word an insult to everything he and his mentor All Might had stood for. You're not a hero. Drakkon didn't even blink, and the tone of his voice was pure contempt. Mirio gritted his teeth and used permeation again. Last time it must have been a coincidence. His quirk was perfect, it would make him intangible. Drakkon's punches couldn't touch him. He could pass through him, find an opening, he could win. But he was wrong, because Drakkon caught up with him anyway. Drakkon's fist connected with his side, knocking the wind out of his body. Mirio staggered, eyes wide, but he refused to back down. He launched himself again. The blows weren't supposed to touch him, but they did. Every time he tried, Drakkon's blows reached him. And the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was the feeling inside him. Something inside him was stirring, like an echo in his soul. One for all, something in the essence of the power he inherited was rejecting him. It was as if something in his being accepted Drakkon's words as absolute truth. No, Mirio gasped, feeling the sweat on his forehead. This couldn't be true, it couldn't be happening, but with each hit the sensation kept growing, one for all shuddering inside him. As if the vestiges inside him doubted, as if everything he believed, everything Sir Night-Eye, All Might and he stood for had been a lie. Are you sorry, kid? Drakkon took a step forward. Mirio stepped back unwillingly, his own body not trusting his quirk. Drakkon smiled under his helmet. Even your own power knows that your justice is false. The weight of his words hit harder than any fist. Mirio froze. In the vestige world of One for All, the storm raged, the power of the Morphin grid like an unstoppable current, seeping into the very fabric of One for All, each impact against Mirio slowly eroding the power they protected. But Drakkon didn't destroy him, not yet. He was patient and wanted to see them. He wanted to observe the guardians of oppression, he wanted to hear their empty excuses, and then it happened. At the center of the vestige world, among the shadows of the former wielders, Lord Drakkon appeared, a part of him, an extension of his will, a manifestation of his absolute power entered One for All. The space vibrated with their presence. The former bearers stepped back, feeling a chill they hadn't felt since they died at the hands of All for One. Because this shouldn't be possible, One for All shouldn't allow intruders, but the Morphin Grid didn't obey its rules, and now Lord Drakkon was watching them, judging them. So these are the heroes of yesteryear. His voice echoed deeply. The first wielder, Yoichi Shigaraki, All for One's younger brother, stepped forward. I don't know how you got in here. Drakkon raised an eyebrow. Because you never thought it was possible. The bearer gritted his teeth. One for All is the power that has been passed down from generation to generation to protect humanity. Protect. Drakkon let out a low laugh. Who have they really protected? The remnant of Nana Shimura stepped forward with a frown. The weak, the innocent, those All for One wanted to dominate. Drakkon tilted his head. And what about the quirkless? Nana tensed. What about those who never had a place in your world? The vestiges fell silent. Drakkon stepped forward. Tell me, with all your supposed power, with your justice, and your protection, when have you ever done anything for them? The first bearer looked away. We couldn't. No. Drakkon interrupted him coldly. They didn't want to. The energy of the Morphin Grid crackled around him. They allowed their society to treat them as mistakes. They allowed the Hero Commission to oppress them. They allowed them to be discarded and forgotten. His gaze hardened. One for All was a lie from the beginning. The vestiges clenched their fists. You don't understand. Nana roared. The world was in danger. We had to make sacrifices. Drakkon laughed bitterly. Sacrifices. He turned and extended an arm, showing the connection to Mirio Tagata, who in the real world was gasping in pain. Look at its current wielder as One for All is rejecting it, because even its own power knows that my truth is absolute. The air turned heavy. The vestiges couldn't respond, because deep down, they knew it was true. One for All couldn't lie to itself. Their era is over. One for All will be the next to fall. The former wielders of One for All roared in outrage, but Drakkon owed them nothing, and with a simple wave of his hand, he erased them. One by one, Yoichi Shigaraki, Kudo, Bruce, Hikage Shinomori, Daigoro Banjo and Entayutai, their existences vanished like ashes in the wind. The weak had no right to demand anything from the powerful. They, who allowed the world to forget the quirkless, who ignored injustices in the name of peace, who accepted the sacrifice of the defenseless while protecting the powerful. They didn't deserve to exist. When the energy storm calmed, only Nana Shimura remained. Drakkon slowly turned towards her. Nana clenched her fists, but said nothing. She knew fighting was useless. She had no power here anymore. She could only watch helplessly and see the truth. Drakkon raised both hands, the energies of the Morphin Grid and One for All colliding, flashes of gold and green illuminating the vestige world. I want you to see this with your own eyes. With a movement he slowly lifted his helmet, revealing the face of the person hiding behind the mask. Nana gasped. Under the helmet there was no monster, there was a boy she knew. Her eyes, once green, now shone with a brilliant gold. But the freckles on her face were unmistakable. Nana shook her head. No. His voice was a whisper. It just can't be. Drakkon smiled. Were you expecting someone else? Nana stepped back. Izuku Midoriya, the boy Toshinori had rejected, the boy All Might had destroyed with his words, the boy her system had abandoned. Now the conqueror of the multiverse. Nana trembled. This can't be. Drakkon bowed his head. Why not? The energy of the Morphin Grid crackled across her skin. Why should he have died? Nana didn't answer. She didn't have an answer, because the truth was right in front of her. Izuku Midoriya had been betrayed by the world and now, he was its executioner. Drakkon raised a hand and the vestige world shuddered in response. Your power is false. One for All vibrated, twisting, weakening. It's nothing more than a lie that has lived too long. Nana screamed in despair. Stop. Don't do it. Drakkon ignored her. It's time for you to disappear. The Morphin Grid roared and with a flash of infinite energy, One for All was destroyed, Nana disappearing along with it. The vestiges, the last fragments of a corrupt power were erased from the universe. Mirio fell to his knees, his breath ragged, his body shaking. One for All was disappearing. The strength his mentor, All Might, entrusted him with, the power that represented centuries of fighting the darkness, the heritage that was passed down from generation to generation was fading. The world watched in absolute silence. The broadcast did not stop. People watched every second. People possessing quirks screamed in despair. Get up. It just can't be. Fight. Fight for US. They expected him to fight, to protect the order of the world, to defend the lie, but for the quirkless, everything was different. That moment was not a tragedy, it was a miracle. At the top of a bridge, a man looked into the abyss, his body trembling, his mind broken by years of suffering. He was quirkless, he had spent his entire life being treated like garbage. He was going to jump, he was going to end his pain, but before taking the final step, he saw the image of Lord Drakkon on a nearby screen, the man who destroyed one for all, the conqueror who defeated the heroes. He saw the god the world tried to silence. For the first time in years he felt hope. His hands stopped shaking, his tears stopped falling. Maybe I'm not alone. In another corner of the world, a mother and her son were leaving the hospital, the woman's hands clutching the diagnostic papers. Her son, her 4-year-old, had been declared quirkless. The doctor said it indifferently. It would be best if I enrolled him in a special school. He has no future in this society. He has no future. Those words destroyed her because she knew what they meant. Her son would be treated like garbage, he would suffer, and his life would never be fair. But as they walked down the avenue, the boy's eyes lit up. Mom, look. The woman looked up. On the giant screen of the tallest building in the city, Lord Drakkon stood like a reborn god, the conqueror of the multiverse, the leader of the forgotten, the destroyer of lies. The mother dropped the hospital papers, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't feel afraid for her son, she felt hope, and her son smiled. Mom, is that man like me? She hugged him tightly. Yes, it is. And in that instant, the world changed. The quirkless were no longer a mistake, they were no longer weak because now they had a leader. The age of Lord Drakkon had begun, but the fight was not over. The metahuman liberation army still held out in the ruins of Deku City. Thousands of Redestro's followers were still standing. They would never accept defeat. They would never accept a useless quirkless telling them that they were the mistake. No matter his power or his absolute dominance, they would not bow down, and that was their last mistake. Drakkon looked at the remnants of the army, the glares of hatred, the faces filled with contempt, the mouths spitting insults and threats. Drakkon only raised one hand. His voice was calm and firm. Finish them off. The sky rumbled. The mechanical titans, the legendary beasts that were once tools of heroes, were now the hand of a conqueror. Serpentera, the black draconic titan, raised his head to the sky, his eyes glowing with a fiery red. A beam of pure energy descended from his mouth, consuming the entire city with unstoppable fire. The Tigerzord and Dragonzord advanced, razing buildings, destroying every trace of the metahuman liberation army. Screams of panic rose up through the streets. Terror gripped those who once thought themselves invincible. Redestro's followers tried to run, flee or fight, but there was no escape or victory, only absolute destruction. In a matter of seconds 120,000 people were wiped off the world, without exception or mercy. The metahuman liberation army was gone. As the storm of fire and destruction ceased and as the roar of the Zords faded into the wind, Deku City was gone. In its place, only ashes and rubble remained, and in the center of it all Lord Drakkon stood, illuminated by the flames, watching the work of his will. Governments were speechless, heroes lost hope, but the quirkless of the world saw justice, because for the first time in history the false gods were punished. Drakkon's message was clear. This world was no longer his, it was his. Drakkon looked up at the sky. You no longer have to fear. The quirkless in every corner of the planet held their breath. Drakkon extended his arm. You have been scorned. You have been trampled. You have been humiliated. Memories of every quirkless person flashed through their minds. The mockery, the closed doors, the rejection from society. Drakkon clenched his fist. But that's over. His gaze shone with the power of the morphin grid. I waited. I fought. I took my destiny into my own hands. The silence in the world was absolute, because what he said next caused the greatest revolution in history. Now, I will give you the power to do the same. The eyes of all the quirkless in the world opened wide. Drakkon not only gave them hope, he gave them power. The morphin grid is infinite, and now, every quirkless in this world will receive its blessing. His words thundered in everyone's minds. The quirkless screamed in excitement, the governments panicked, the heroes realized the truth. The balance of society was about to change forever. there would no longer be domination of quirk users over the quirkless. The power of the morphin grid would belong to them. Drakkon looked one last time at the camera and his last sentence was an order. Come to me, claim your destiny, and together let us conquer this world. The transmission was cut off, but the message had already been recorded in history. The quirkless revolution began. Destro saw the sky covered by the shadows of the Zords. He saw Serpentera rise like a mechanical divinity, his silhouette eclipsing the light of the sun. How his city, the cradle of his ideology, the foundation of the new humanity, was reduced to ashes. The screams of his followers were drowned out by the roar of fire and metal. Everything he had built, what he believed in, was destroyed in an instant. He accepted his defeat against Shigaraki as the most powerful user of quirks, but against Lord Drakkon his supremacy had been a joke. No. He whispered in disbelief. He had spent his entire life believing himself superior, defending the right of quirks to rule. He had seen the quirkless as parasites, mistakes that should be eliminated, but now he was the mistake and history would forget him. The flames devoured him before he could say a last word. Skeptic ran as buildings collapsed around him. The servers where he stored the revolution's information went up in flames. His control over propaganda, manipulation, information networks, all lost in an instant. But that wasn't what terrified him. It wasn't the destruction of his army, it was the truth. Were we always wrong? He never believed in the inferiority of the quirkless because of religion or dogma. For him, it was a matter of control. If the world accepted Drakkon's truth, if the world accepted that the quirkless were the true heirs to power, then their entire ideology was a lie. Their existence had no purpose. The Dragon Zord trampled his shelter without him being able to do anything else. Himiko gasped. She had tried to escape. The streets were covered in fire and ash and there was nowhere safe. Her knives, her reflexes, the quirks she could use with the blood at her disposal, nothing mattered. I don't want to die. She always lived on the edge of madness. She played with death, but she never thought that death would come to her in this way. He looked up at the sky where he saw Lord Drakkon on Serpentera and laughed, understanding that there was nowhere to hide from him. His last words were a laugh as the city crumbled around him. Dabi knew he was going to die. He knew it from the moment the sky darkened, the moment the roar of the Zords shook the earth. But he wasn't afraid, not because he didn't want to live, but because living never mattered to him. His revenge wasn't complete. Endeavor was dead, but the world still didn't know the truth. But none of that mattered anymore. Serpentera's explosion lit up the city like the end of the world. Dabi smiled one last time. Wow, what a way to die. When the destruction was over, when the earth stopped shaking and the flames died down, Deku City was no more. The meta-human liberation army had been erased. The villains who once challenged society died ingloriously. And in the sky, over the ruins of his victory, Lord Drakkon watched with satisfaction. United Nations headquarters, emergency virtual meeting. The destruction of Deku City still burned on screens around the world, but the worst part wasn't the devastation, it was the response of the people. In less than an hour, airports and ports collapsed, millions of quirkless gathered in stations, airports and ports with a single goal. Arriving in Japan with Lord Drakkon, the satellite images were terrifying, a mass exodus, something no government had anticipated. In an ultra-secure virtual room, the world leaders held an emergency meeting to stop what could be the collapse of the world order. The President of the United States banged the table in fury. This is an absolute disaster. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom leaned on the table, his hands shaking. It's not just a disaster, it's a fucking global uprising. The President of China spoke with a firm voice. We can no longer ignore the quirkless. They have a leader now. The German Chancellor viewed the migration reports with terror. Millions of our citizens are leaving the country. The quirkless no longer recognize us as their governments. The Russian Prime Minister snorted. We should eliminate them now that they're gathered. An icy silence fell over the meeting. Some rulers nodded secretly. It was the most logical thing to do. If all the quirkless gathered in Japan, they could be exterminated once and for all. But then, the Prime Minister of France spoke with a tense voice. And what do you think Drakkon will do if we try that? Everyone held their breath, because they knew the answer. They saw what happened in Deku City. They saw what his mechanical titans could do and how it erased 120,000 lives in a matter of seconds. Because they saw how he destroyed Shigaraki and the heroes without even trying. Because Drakkon is not a hero, He has no morals, and if they provoked him he wouldn't stop until the whole world burned. The president of Japan finally spoke, his face drawn, tension etched in every wrinkle. There's nothing we can do. The other leaders looked at him in disbelief. What do you mean? The man leaned against the desk, exhausted. Drakkon has already won. Absolute silence. People don't trust us anymore. They hate us. The quirkless have been trampled on for centuries and now they have a god on their side. No one said anything. They knew it was true. The era of quirk supremacy was crumbling and it was just the beginning. Meanwhile in Nezu's room at Ua, he closed his eyes for a moment, the sounds of the broadcast still echoing in his head. Deku City had disappeared, the country's most powerful heroes had fallen and the supremacy of quirks was being destroyed. But none of that mattered to him at that moment. The only thing on his mind was a desperate thought. Please let them survive. The Ua students had been in the mountains, trying to stop Gigantomachia. If Bakugo and Mirio, who were the strongest, had died, then what chance did the others have? Uncertainty churned his stomach. He couldn't do anything now, just wait, and Nezu hated waiting because while he waited in anguish, the world was already changing. Nezu looked at the chessboard in his mind. The pieces were placed in their initial position and he hadn't moved a single one yet because he never had the chance. Drakkon had made the first move. And it wasn't a simple move, it was check before the game had even started. Nezu frowned. Drakkon wasn't a simple villain. He wasn't all for one. He wasn't an enemy they could understand. He was a conqueror of universes if his words were true. So how do you defeat someone who has subjugated entire universes? How do you stop someone who has seen beyond the veil of the multiverse? Nezu exhaled in frustration. If the circumstances were different, if this weren't a threat to all existence, if this didn't challenge the entire structure of society, he would be excited, because that would mean the multiverse was real. That there were worlds beyond their own. Knowledge had no limits, but that scientific curiosity, that desire to explore the unknown was overshadowed by reality. Because this wasn't a fascinating discovery, it was a death sentence. Nezu rubbed his forehead. The reaction of the world leaders was predictable. They would try their worst, stop the quirkless exodus, suppress them, kill them, but what I hoped they would understand was that this would only provoke Drakkon's wrath. Nezu gulped. We are doomed. But he couldn't give up. There were still pieces on the board and moves to be made. If he was going to fight an enemy of this level, if he was going to face someone who could wipe out entire cities with a single gesture, then he needed to prepare. He looked at the pieces in his mind again. The game was already underway and he only had one chance. Nezu smiled tiredly. Let's see if you really are a god or just a man with power. Because if there was one thing I knew about gods, it was that they all eventually fall. The world was already in a panic, but the leaders of the superpowers couldn't afford to be afraid. They couldn't allow the balance of power to collapse. If Drakkon was truly a conqueror of universes, he would have the ability to subjugate entire realities, so they couldn't give him time to strengthen. They had to eliminate him now, whatever the cost. The President of the United States and the President of China looked at each other through the screen of their ultra-secure communication channel, saying nothing. Because they already knew what the other was thinking, they had already made a decision. Both took out their nuclear briefcases. The only option left to them, Japan would be destroyed. Drakkon and his titans would be eradicated from the face of the earth, no matter the collateral damage or the consequences. If Drakkon didn't fall today, tomorrow would be too late. The codes were entered, the keys were turned, the orders were sent, and the satellites confirmed the launch. Within seconds, the nuclear missiles took off. Japan was doomed, or so they thought. The instant the missiles crossed the stratosphere, the secure transmission between world leaders was forcibly seized. The screens flickered, the communications systems were tapped, the alarms screeched in despair, and then the image of Lord Drakkon, atop the mighty Serpentera, was projected across all their screens. His posture was relaxed and his voice was mocking. Wow, what a surprise. World leaders felt the cold sweat run down their backs. The quirkless in airports, ports, and in their homes watched the broadcast in real time. Drakkon laughed. Did you really think you could hide this? The picture changed. On screens around the world, the meetings in command centers were exposed. World leaders appeared trembling. The images were clear. The presidents of the United States and China holding the nuclear briefcases, the generals with pale faces, the ministers not knowing what to do, pure fear reflected in their eyes. Drakkon bowed slightly. Look closely. my quirkless. His voice became deeper. Look at your leaders, look at the gods of this world, look at them trembling like frightened children, that's what they're really like. The whole world saw the truth. Governments had tried to kill millions, just to maintain their power. The quirkless, watching from their homes, were filled with rage. The president of France gasped. This is impossible. The president of the United States banged the table. How the hell did he get our net? The president of China clenched his fists. Disable access. Get this monster off our networks. Serpentera's eyes flashed like a supernova. In a split second all nuclear missiles were deactivated. A massive hack, an intervention by alien technology far superior to anything else in the world. The entire world's defense systems collapsed. The president of the United States slumped in his chair, and the president of China clutched his head. Drakkon smiled. Did you really think I didn't anticipate this? The silence was absolute. Drakkon turned to the camera, speaking directly to the quirkless watching the broadcast. No friends. His voice was soft. They will never have to live in fear again. These men and women are not gods. They are not invincible. They do not have the right to decide who lives and who dies. I will give them what they have always denied them, power. The transmission was cut off and the message had been given. The quirkless of the world were set in motion. The world fell into unprecedented chaos. And the leaders of the nations knew that the era of their dominion had come to an end. Toshinori ran through the halls of the mental hospital, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind in chaos. Mirio had fallen. Deku City had been wiped off the map. Everything he had fought and sacrificed for was crumbling before his eyes. But now, none of that mattered. Melissa, she was the only thing he had left, the only thing that could redeem him, his last reason to keep going. He couldn't lose her too. A nurse guided him to Melissa's room. Something felt wrong and Toshinori noticed it immediately. The hallway was too quiet, the air felt heavy. When the nurse finally stopped in front of the door, her expression was pure tension. Toshinori gulped. The nurse opened the door and when Toshinori entered her world collapsed. The room was empty. Melissa wasn't there. There were no signs of a struggle or traces of a kidnapping. The sheets were neatly folded. The lights were off. The window was open, letting in the night wind. Melissa had left of her own volition. Toshinori took a step back and his legs trembled. No. She placed a hand on the wall. It couldn't be Melissa. She had nowhere to go. She had no reason to leave. She had spent 18 months in this place, lost in her own mind in a catatonic state and now, she was simply gone. Toshinori turned to the nurse, his face filled with despair. When was the last time anyone saw her? The woman looked at the ground. A couple of hours ago. How could he leave without anyone noticing? We don't know. Nobody saw anything. Toshinori clutched the door. Melissa was somewhere in this world and he had no idea what he would do, but inside, a terrifying idea began to form. Melissa saw Drakkon's transmission, saw what he did, heard his call. Toshinori felt a chill run down his spine. Had she gone looking for him? The night in Musudafu was absolute chaos, the streets roaring with riots, the quirkless rising up, furiously banging on the doors that had once been closed to them. Those with quirks struggled to maintain control, refusing to accept that the world no longer belonged to them, cries of anger, fear, and despair mingling in the air. But Melissa Shield didn't hear any of that. For her, everything was silent. There was only one thought in her mind. Izuku had called her, he had come back for her. Her bare feet touched the cold asphalt of the city, her hospital gown fluttered in the night wind, but she didn't care, she only had one destination. Her steps led her to the park where she was supposed to meet Starboy 15, where her friend never arrived, where her heart broke 18 months ago, and when she arrived at the cafe where they were supposed to meet she saw him. At one of the tables outside, sitting quietly, was Lord Drakkon, the light from the lamppost illuminating his white and gold armor, his posture relaxed, casual, as if he had been waiting for years. Melissa stopped, her legs trembled, her heart began to pound. He looked up, his golden eyes behind his helmet calmly observing her. For a moment time froze. Melissa didn't know what to say, didn't know how to breathe. When he spoke everything fell into place. Melissa. His voice was deep, but familiar, strong, but soft. Melissa covered her mouth with her hands, her blue eyes filled with tears. It was him. Izuku was back, and after all this time he hadn't forgotten her. Lord Drakkon rose from his seat. his presence dominating the surroundings, but for Melissa, he was not a conqueror, he was not a god, he was not the destroyer of the world, he was Izuku. His gloved hand reached out to her, calmly guiding her. Melissa moved forward slowly, each step feeling unreal, each heartbeat pounding in her chest like a war drum. When she finally sat down in front of him, Drakkon raised both hands. And with a movement he lifted his helmet. Melissa saw him. He was no longer a child. He was not the shy and dreamy boy she talked to on the forums. He was not the teenager that society trampled on. He was a man. His face was strong, defined. His features had the maturity of someone who had seen too much. His eyes were no longer green. They shone with a golden glow, deep and eternal, eyes that had seen universes fall, gods kneel, eyes that had wept, but now burned only with purpose. Their hair was longer, jet black with green-tinted tips. Melissa shuddered. Everything had changed, but also nothing had really changed, and when her gaze met Izuku's, all she could say was, "You arrived late." Drakkon smiled. It was a real smile, not the arrogant and mocking one the world had heard, just for her. "I know." Melissa laughed, although her eyes were still full of tears. "Idiot." Izuku extended his hand again. She took it without hesitation. She would never be alone again. Melissa squeezed Izuku's hand. She didn't want to let go. She didn't want this moment to be a dream. But he didn't disappear. He wasn't a mirage. He was real. His skin was warm. His grip was firm, and his gaze shone with an intensity she had never seen before. When Izuku began to speak, Melissa immersed herself in his story. "I died that night, Melissa." His voice did not tremble. It was the tone of a man who had accepted his fate. "Or at least that's what I should have done." Melissa held her breath. In that explosion, memories flooded back to Melissa. The news on TV, the image of her friend and her mother, dead in a gas explosion. It wasn't an accident. The Hero Commission did it because I saw something I shouldn't have seen. Because my existence made them uncomfortable. Melissa's eyes filled with fury. "Izuku." But he raised a hand, calming her. "The explosion was going to kill me. That was the plan." Melissa felt the lump in her throat. "But then he found me." His gaze hardened. "Lord Drakkon." Melissa listened intently. Izuku spoke of his arrival at the dimensional prison, a place outside of time, a hell where a single man had been locked up for 200 years. "Drakkon showed me the truth." Melissa felt a chill. "He told me what this world was really like." He told her about the Morphin Grid, how quirks weren't a miracle but a desperate defense against its return, their very existence erased out of fear. The universe itself tried to kill him, Melissa. Izuku closed his eyes for a moment. But he survived. When she opened them again, Melissa saw the truth in them. Conviction, power, absolute determination, but also hope and longing, were the eyes of a conqueror and also the eyes of Izuku Midoriya. "Drakkon made me an offer." His grip on Melissa's hand tightened. "We merged. We became one, and together we escaped." Melissa's eyes widened in surprise. "It's me. But it's him too." Melissa tried to process it. The boy she once knew, the friend she talked to every night, the quirkless boy who understood her better than anyone had become the conqueror of the multiverse. "That's why I came back." Izuku looked at his hand, the gold and black energy vibrating gently. "Because now I am more than Izuku Midoriya, more than Lord Drakkon." His gaze met hers. "And because you were forgotten too." Melissa shook her head. It couldn't be true. She couldn't accept that those words came from Izuku, that the explosion wasn't an accident. His death had been planned. The Hero Commission had decided to kill him. Melissa clenched her fists. "Izuku, they don't." But he didn't let her finish. He had to show her the truth, even if it hurt. With a movement of his hand, a holographic projection appeared before them. Melissa held her breath. The images showed Island. But not as he remembered it. The paradise of science was in ruins, the facilities destroyed, the files erased, the laboratories razed, but the worst was the image of David Shield, his father. Her only family, the man who raised her with love and patience, was lying on the floor, motionless, dead. "No," Melissa whispered, her voice barely a whisper. The images continued. A team of undercover agents were reviewing the remains of the laboratories, erasing the evidence, eliminating the truth, and among them all might. Melissa felt dizzy. No. Not this. His uncle Toshinori, his father's best friend, his idol, stood by, watching his father's corpse and did nothing. No. Melissa screamed, throwing her hands up to her head. Reality faltered around her. Darkness tried to return to her mind, the emptiness where she had been trapped for 18 months, despair dragged her back. It was too painful, enough to break her again, but before she could fall, before her mind could completely shatter, a hand held her in a firm, familiar, warm grip. Melissa. Izuku's voice brought her back, his golden gaze holding her, his hands reminding her she wasn't alone. Don't let them take this away from you again. His tone was not that of a conqueror, it was the voice of her friend, the only one who never abandoned her or betrayed her. I want you with me. Melissa gasped, and in that moment the emptiness disappeared. His words clung to Melissa's heart, they were the only thing keeping her going. The only thing that kept her on the brink of collapse. Before she could respond, before she could process it all, a flash of green and gold enveloped her, the world disappeared, and when she opened her eyes again Melissa gasped. She was surrounded by technology she had never seen in her life. The Dragonzord controls glowed with lights and systems that seemed centuries more advanced than anything on Earth. Screens floated in the air, circuits thrumming with pure energy. It was impossible, but it was real. God. Melissa reached out, touching one of the consoles reverently. This is incredible. Izuku smiled. He couldn't help but feel his chest burn seeing her like that, her expression full of emotion, her eyes shining with wonder, the way her fingers ran over each panel with a mixture of curiosity and devotion. It was beautiful. Since their first video call, so many years ago, Izuku had been in love with her, the only person who never saw him as less, one of the only people who always believed in him. Tommy Oliver's memories inside him shook. He understood that emotion perfectly, because he also remembered someone like that, Kimberly Hart. Drakkon closed his eyes for a moment. That love had saved him once and destroyed him, but Izuku was different. He had a chance that Drakkon never had, and he wasn't going to waste it. Melissa turned to him, emotion still shining on her face. Where are we going? Izuku looked at the main screen. To what remains of Island. Melissa tensed. The place where her father died searching for answers. The Dragonzord slowly rose over the waters of the Pacific. Through the morning mist, the ruins of Island emerged, the place that was once the epicenter of innovation and science that was now only a shadow of its former glory. Melissa looked out from the cockpit of the Dragonzord. The island was still standing, but it was in decay. The buildings were rusted by the salty air. The structures, although relatively intact, showed signs of abandonment, but what truly infuriated her was seeing the empty facilities. The Hero Commission had taken everything. His father's data, projects, and inventions had all been confiscated, and the backup data was erased. It wasn't enough for them to kill my father, they stole his legacy. Melissa murmured, clenching her fists. Izuku watched her silently. He knew this was devastating. This place wasn't just a lab, it had been her home. But he also knew what she was thinking. Melissa wasn't someone who would give up when she knew who was responsible. Melissa stepped forward, letting her analytical mind take over. The data was gone, the staff was gone, but the infrastructure still existed. The labs, though empty, were still functional. The power system was still active, albeit at low capacity. The defense structures were inactive but not destroyed, and now with the Morphin Grid and the Zords, technology they could rebuild it. Not just as a research center or a refuge, but as the capital of his empire. That's what you wanted, right? Melissa looked at Izuku, her eyes shining with determination. Drakkon smiled. What better base than the most advanced floating island in history? Melissa inhaled deeply. For the first time in months, she felt a sense of purpose, a mission. Island would be the epicenter of the new world, the base from which the quirkless would rise, the beacon that would guide the forgotten. Melissa felt her heart stop. For the first time in a long time someone saw her, understood her, wanted her in their world, and that someone was Izuku, Lord Drakkon, the man who had changed the fate of the world. Melissa smiled with tears in her eyes. I'm with you. Izuku smiled as well, raising his hand, caressing Melissa's cheek with a tenderness that only he could give her. His touch was not that of a conqueror, it was that of a man who had waited for her, that of a man who had loved her from the moment he saw her. Melissa closed her eyes, leaning against his palm. Izuku came closer. She felt him, and when their lips met the Morphin Grid trembled. The kiss was not chaste, it was full of love, desire, redemption. It was the union of two souls that should never have been separated, and Melissa reciprocated with all her soul. Because this was her destiny, This was her place, next to him. As they separated, Izuku pulled something from his belt, a device with a golden insignia of a burning bird. "This one's yours." Melissa took it reverently. The light of the morphin grid vibrated in the air. Melissa closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, her voice was clear. "Morphin time." An explosion of golden fire covered his body. The light enveloped his skin, running through it with infinite energy. His hospital gown disintegrated, replaced by a red and gold suit, shiny and elegant with the phoenix symbol on the chest. Her white gloves and boots shone with the purity of the light. Her helmet was shaped like the head of a phoenix as the energy dissipated. Melissa was no longer a prisoner in a system that never valued her. She was no longer a forgotten scientist, she was now the Phoenix Ranger. Melissa exhaled forcefully, feeling her new power. It was something impossible. She had never experienced a similar sensation before. The power of the morphin grid ran through her veins like divine fire, infinite and free. Beneath her helmet, her face filled with pure ecstasy. For the first time in her life, she was more than just a quirkless girl, more than just the daughter of a great man. She was a symbol. The Phoenix Empress and the Dragon Emperor, two unstoppable forces with a single purpose. Izuku extended his hand, and as the sun rose over the horizon, the world witnessed the dawn of the new empire. The air still smelled of ashes. The echoes of Deku City's destruction rumbled in the wind, but against all odds some survived. Fortunately for them, most of the UA students had been in the mountains. The group trying to stop Gigantomachia had stayed away from the massacre in the city, although that didn't mean they didn't feel the terror. They saw the sky darken, heard the roars of the mechanical titans, and witnessed the annihilation of Deku City. When the Zord's attack ended and silence replaced the screams, only a feeling of absolute helplessness remained. The heroes had lost. Deku City was now a crater. The world had changed, and they were witnesses to the fall of the society they knew. Nimari saw her life flash before her eyes. She had been surrounded by villains. She knew she wasn't going to get out alive. She had no escape, but before they could attack her, a colossal shadow loomed over her. Serpentera's tail swept down like the wrath of a god. The villains surrounding her were crushed mercilessly. Midnight lay on the ground, trembling, covered in blood and dust. She had been seconds away from dying, but in a cruel and ironic twist of fate she was saved by the monster that destroyed everything, her heart hammering in her chest. Is this what the villains felt when they fought All Might? No, it was worse, something they couldn't even comprehend. Nimari stood up with difficulty, her breathing heavy, but firm. She had to find the others, and to her relief, she wasn't alone. Yu Takayama, Mount Lady, was among the survivors. Despite being injured and exhausted, her presence was steadfast. Between the two of them, they gathered the students. Momo held an injured Kaminari, who could barely stand. Kirishima carried Zero, who had a broken leg. Shoto stared into space, still processing what had happened. Kyoka trembled after Serpentera's roar blew one of her connectors. Abara murmured prayers, her faith wavering at the reality they were facing, but they were still alive. "We're going to Ua," Nimari said firmly. "We have no other choice." Yu Takayama nodded. The battle is over, but the war isn't. The students said nothing, but in their hearts, they knew they were right. The world would not be the same. Society had fallen, and now, the only thing they could do was prepare for the new order, for Lord Drakkon. Nezu's phone vibrated on his desk, an alert on his private line, his personal number, known only to a handful of people. But what caught his attention wasn't the call itself but the source, a pay phone in a bus station on the other side of what had been Deku City. Nezu tensed, his normally calm paw moving swiftly, picking up the phone. "Who is it?" There was a 2-second silence, then a familiar voice. "Nezu soy Midnight." The genius mouse bear closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his thoughts were already in motion. "Listen carefully, Midnight." His voice was firm and controlled. "Tell me what happened." "We survived." Nezu exhaled in relief but said nothing, letting Midnight finish. "Most of the students were in the mountains when everything happened. Bakugo, Mirio and the others who were in the city are dead, Nezu." The phrase fell like a bomb. Nezu closed his eyes. He had already feared it, but hearing it from someone who was there made it real. "Now we're at a bus station. We don't know what to do." Nezu turned to his computer, already calculating options. "Don't call emergency services." Midnight fell silent. "That." Nezu rubbed his forehead. The quirkless riots have overwhelmed the police and hospitals, there's no way to help them, and we don't know who to trust. Midnight cursed under his breath. So what do we do? Nezu gave a small smile. Wait, I'll send a transport in a couple of hours, I won't abandon you. The line was silent for a moment, then Midnight's voice trembled slightly. Thank you, Nezu. He nodded. Hold on a little longer. And with that, he hung up. Nezu looked at his chessboard in his mind. The pieces were no longer where they should have been. The rooks had fallen, the knights had been sacrificed, but there were still pieces in play, and if the best strategist in the world knew one thing, it was that the game isn't over until the king falls. Nezu smiled coldly. Your move, Drakkon. But before he could fully process it, his computer screen lit up with a new alert. An observation satellite above Island was freaking out with impossible power readings. The system flickered, trying to stabilize the transmission. Finally, when the high-resolution images appeared and Nezu saw them, he froze. On the screen, the images were clear. Island, which had been seized by the Commission and was supposed to be in ruins, was now glowing with new energy. The readings were similar to those of Drakkon's Zords. But what most captured his attention was Melissa, the young woman who should be in a psychiatric hospital, lost in her own mind. Now dressed in a red and gold Drakkon-like suit, his phoenix-shaped helmet glowing with fiery energy, the satellite hologram identifying his face before his transformation, Nezu clutched his desk. This can't be. His first reaction was rejection. Maybe it was a mistake, it was someone similar to her. Drakkon had found another quirkless and dressed her in that suit and helmet. But deep down, he knew the truth. It was Melissa, and she had chosen to be there. The impact of the revelation hit him like a hammer. If Toshinori saw this, if he knew that the only person he had left in the world was now by Drakkon's side, he would collapse. Nezu looked back at his chessboard. His gaze was no longer the same. A few moments ago, he believed he could still move the pieces in his favor, but now Drakkon had made his move, and it wasn't just a simple movement. He had placed his queen in the center of the board. Melissa's shield was no longer a neutral piece. It was now part of Drakkon's board. Nezu closed his eyes. The game was changing, and he wasn't sure he could win it. The morphin grid vibrated in the air, its energy coursing through every corner of Island. It wasn't just a power source or an infinite battery. It was the very essence of the universe, life, creation and rebirth. Izuku and Melissa rose up onto the central platform around them. The island's dormant systems responded to their presence. Izuku reached out his hand towards her. Melissa took it without hesitation, and the morphin grid erupted with emerald and scarlet energy. The lights of Island flickered, screens rebooted, servers came back to life, metal structures vibrated, absorbing the new force, and then, the impossible happened. The island, which had been above the ocean, began to rise, not by human technology or propulsion systems but by the absolute power of the morphin grid. Island was no longer just a city in the ocean, it was becoming a fortress in the sky. The artificial gardens, withered by months of neglect, flourished once more. The fountains once again ran with crystal clear water, and the security systems, enhanced by the grid, shone like an impenetrable defense. This was no longer a simple city of technological development, it was the heart of the new world, the capital of the Drakkon Empire, and its empress knew it. Melissa looked on in amazement as Island was reborn. Izuku, come with me. Guiding him by the hand, she took him to a special place, the park where she played as a child, where her father brought her every afternoon, the place where her innocence still existed. Despite its abandonment, it remained standing. The energy of the grid restored it, returning the bright green to the trees, rejuvenating each petal of the flowers, and under the large tree where Melissa always played, she stopped. His heart was beating fast. He wanted to share this moment with Izuku. He wanted this place to be a part of him too. Izuku looked at her tenderly at that moment. She was no longer just his ally, she was his partner, his equal, his queen. Melissa approached him without hesitation. Izuku wrapped his arms around her waist. When their lips met, the morphin grid shone more intensely. They sealed their union with a passionate kiss, the emperor and his empress. The bus engine roared on the silent road. The sky was covered in smoke. The lights flickered uncertainly. Toshinori Yagi, Nezu and Vlad King were in the front of the vehicle, driving towards the bus station where the survivors were waiting for them, UA's last hope. But deep down, they knew the truth. There was no victory, only desolation. When the bus stopped, the door opened with a mechanical squeal. The students looked up in hope. Nimori was the first to move. Yu Takayama followed behind and the students stood up silently, Momo holding Kaminari, Kirishima with a tired look, Kyoka biting her lips to keep from crying, Shoto with a blank expression. As Nimari boarded the bus, Toshinori stepped forward. Aizawa. Nimari stopped. He said nothing, he just shook his head. The weight of the truth hit him like a fist in the stomach. Toshinori took a step back. Aizawa was dead, one of his last friends, one of the last true heroes, erased as if he had never existed. Helplessness grew in his chest. Vlad King closed the bus doors. The students needed to rest, but Nezu had other news to share. It's not just Aizawa. Toshinori turned to him. Vlad King took a breath, trying to maintain his composure. Lord Drakkon made Island his stronghold. The silence became absolute. Toshinori blinked. What did you say? It's no longer just a city in the ocean, it's now a fortress in the sky. Toshinori felt a chill run down his spine and in his mind, only one thought echoed. Melissa. Nimari sank into her seat. It hasn't even been 12 hours. Yu Takayama closed his eyes. And the world is already on the brink of collapse. Toshinori clenched his fists. Drakkon had not only won, he had shattered the balance of the world and they had no way to stop him. The bus began to travel through the streets. The survivors of Ua looked out the windows, observing a world that was no longer the same. The streets were covered in riots, people with quirks tried to hold on to the old world. But the quirkless, they had already accepted the change. Nimari, Yu Takayama and the students looked with gloomy faces at the bus screen, where the morning news announced what everyone feared. The presenter, a young woman with brown hair and a nervous smile, appeared on screen, the graphics flashing red, the news devastating. The world has not yet recovered from the appearance of Lord Drakkon. Deku City was wiped off the map. The death toll exceeds 120,000. Japan's mightiest heroes have fallen while the Hero Commission remains silent. Island is no longer in the ocean. On the screen, satellite images showed the impossible. The island floating above the clouds, Serpentera, the mechanical dragon, patrolling the sky like a guardian god, the Tigerzord and Dragonzord towering in the center of the city. Nimari gritted her teeth. Yu Takayama crossed his arms, feeling a knot in his stomach. The students looked at each other, not knowing what to say. But then the tone of the newscast changed. The anchor smiled, but it wasn't a nervous smile, it was a smile of devotion. All my life, I was treated like garbage. The students tensed. This wasn't part of the script, and the presenter continued speaking. Do you know why I got this job? Because I'm pretty, because I slept with the owner of the channel, I didn't have a quirk and no one believed I could do anything more, but today everything changed. The cameras moved, the cleaning staff approached the presenter's table, the technicians stopped hiding behind the cameras, and the security guards, both men and women quirkless, raised their heads with pride. They also had something to say. For years, they ignored us. They treated us as if we were invisible. They paid us less. They looked down on us. They told us we were useless. The broadcast went viral in seconds. But now we have a leader. Now we have power. The screen showed images of Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress on Island. Hundreds of quirkless gathered at the airports, the cities in rebellion, and then the words that made the world tremble. Thank you, Lord Drakkon. Thank you for giving us back what was taken from us. Thank you for making us visible. Nimari covered her mouth with a hand. Yu swallowed, feeling his skin prickle. The students trembled. This can't be happening, Abara whispered. Momo closed her eyes, clenching her fists. Kirishima ran a hand over his face. Kyoka couldn't breathe. Toshinori, sitting in the front, felt his heart break. Because it wasn't just Drakkon anymore, it was the whole world. The revolution had begun and there was no way to stop it. The bus fell into absolute silence. The Ua survivors stared at the screen without blinking. The newscast had changed signal without warning. The broadcast showed the central garden of Island. It was not a war room or the throne of a tyrant. It was not a fortress full of soldiers. Under the shade of a tree, sitting calmly, was Lord Drakkon, and on his lap, lying peacefully, was his empress. Melissa's shield rested her head on his chest, her eyes closed with an expression of pure serenity. Izuku was wearing a white shirt and black pants, his long hair tied in a low ponytail. Melissa was wearing an elegant red dress, her golden hair falling in soft waves over her back. They looked like a normal couple, but they weren't. They were the new owners of the world. And when Melissa opened her eyes and looked at the camera, Toshinori almost fell out of his seat, because her voice resonated with absolute calm. My name is Melissa Shield. Melissa's voice spread throughout the world. Almost 2 years ago, I was just a quirkless college student, someone society ignored, but today I am the empress of this new world. Her hand intertwined with Drakkon's, her fingers fitting perfectly with his. And I'm here because I finally found the only person who never betrayed me. Melissa turned her face towards Izuku. He looked at her with the same fire in his golden eyes. In that instant Toshinori felt his soul break. You covered his mouth. Nimari leaned back in her seat, feeling the cold sweat on her back. The students couldn't speak, and Toshinori was trembling. Because that was not a declaration of war or a threat or an explosion of rage or revenge. It was love and devotion. Melissa had chosen Izuku, Lord Drakkon. There was no doubt in her voice, only certainty. This was her home. For her, this was her destiny. The world held its breath. Melissa Shield was no longer just David Shield's daughter or an inventor, and she was definitely not a powerless person accepting her fate. She was the Phoenix Empress, and today, everyone would listen to her. Melissa kept her hand intertwined with Izuku's, her eyes shining with a fierce intensity. Yesterday, they experienced the devastating power of the dragon. They saw corruption and oppression reduced to ashes. His tone was firm, confident. But today, the sunlight illuminated his face. Today you will learn about the reconstruction of the Phoenix. The words echoed in every corner of the world. Melissa was no longer a shadow in society. She was a leader. She was the new symbol of change, but as she continued speaking, her voice grew colder. Darker. Because there was someone she couldn't forgive, Melissa looked up, addressing one person in particular. Toshinori Yagi. Toshinori froze. She was looking at him, not at the camera. Hatred seeped into every syllable. I know what you did. You, my uncle, my hero, the man who claimed to love my family. You let my father die. Toshinori couldn't breathe, and Melissa leaned into the camera. You sealed his fate, betrayed him, and then took the only person he had left in the world, pretending to be his protector. The silence was unbearable. Toshinori trembled. Everything Melissa said was what he feared most in the world. But before Melissa could sink into rage, Izuku leaned in and kissed her cheek, a simple, soft, and loving gesture. Melissa closed her eyes. The hatred dissipated, because she was not alone. Izuku kept her firm, and with that, the Phoenix Empress smiled again. The bus fell silent. Toshinori brought a hand to his face, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. You couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Nimari knew there was no turning back. The students realized that the heroes were no longer the protagonists of the story. Now, it was the villains, the story the world was watching. It was the story of Drakkon and his Empress, how the Forgotten would take control. It was the story of how the Phoenix and the Dragon would build a new world. Izuku slowly let go of Melissa's hand, calmly stood up, looking straight into the camera. His voice was deep, unwavering. My name is Izuku Midoriya. The weight of those words fell upon Toshinori. The boy who had been shattered by their words and the commission of heroes now stood before them as a conqueror. I died almost 2 years ago. The world thought I died in an accident, but it wasn't an accident. His gaze hardened. The heroes tensed in their seats. Toshinori felt the blood drain from his face. Izuku was going to reveal the truth. The hero commission executed me. The silence became absolute. My mother was murdered, while I was sentenced to death because I was an inconvenience to the peace, because someone without a quirk had no right to challenge the order of their society. The quirkless around the world held their breath. Those who hadn't yet chosen a side felt their loyalty waver, and those who still defended the heroes couldn't deny the truth. Izuku's voice didn't tremble and his golden eyes didn't lie. But now I'm back and we'll put things right. At that moment, a metallic roar shook the island. The transmission changed angle, showing the island's hangars. The automatic laboratories, enhanced with the morphin grid, had finished their masterpiece. Melissa smiled proudly. My Zord is ready. The floodgates opened and from within, a colossal machine emerged. The Phoenix Zord, its golden and red wings spread majestically, its head raised to the sky, its sharp beak shining like a heavenly spear. The turbines on its body roared with unmatched power. The air heated up around it, as if its mere existence could set the sky ablaze. And with a final mechanical scream he took flight beside her. Serpentera accompanied him. The sky was his. Melissa looked at the camera. Island no longer needs protection from heroes, we will protect ourselves. The two titans flew in formation, patrolling the floating island. With that, the message was clear. Island was not a refuge, it was a nation, an empire, and no one could challenge its power. Governments were on the verge of collapse. Not even 24 hours had passed since the appearance of Lord Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress, and the world was no longer the same. The mass migration of quirkless people had reached unprecedented levels. Airports were overwhelmed, ports were collapsing under the pressure of thousands of people trying to leave the country. The rulers feared the worst. They could not allow more people to gain the power of the Morphin Grid nor more quirkless to join Drakkon. So they did the only thing they could do. They shut down Japan, a nationwide lockdown. Airports were closed and ports were blockaded, while pro-heroes and military officers patrolled the borders, preventing the quirkless from escaping. The different news networks repeated the same propaganda over and over again. Order must be maintained. Don't be fooled by the terrorists. The heroes will protect them. But no one believed it. The quirkless were no longer afraid. They knew the truth and their salvation was on the way. The sky suddenly darkened, the clouds parted, the alarms at the airports roared, and the military looked up in terror, because above Japan's international airport, Island appeared in the skies. The colossal floating island glowed with the energy of the Morphin Grid. Leading its journey was the Phoenixert. The gigantic gold and red Zord descended onto the landing strip. The engines of the other planes immediately shut down, the electrical systems collapsing under the interference of the Morphin Grid. The soldiers aimed their weapons, but the Phoenixert opened its wings. The heat it emitted melted the pavement beneath them, and then, the voice of the Phoenix Empress was heard. Melissa spoke from the cockpit of the Phoenixert, her face appearing on every screen in the airport. The quirkless are not prisoners, they are free, and anyone who tries to stop them will be reduced to ashes. The soldiers trembled as the quirkless rushed towards the Phoenixert. The gates opened, allowing them to board. One by one, they were taken to safety. The blockade of the airport had been broken. But that wasn't all. At Japan's tourist port, the situation was just as desperate. The military and professional heroes had closed the ships. The quirkless were treated like criminals. But then the ocean roared. Waves rose like mountains, and from the depths the Dragon Zord emerged. The steel titan emerged from the water with a mechanical roar. Ships reeled under its shadow. The soldiers fired desperately, but the bullets did nothing. The Dragon Zord was unstoppable. Its eyes shone with a green glow, and with a single blow of its tail, it destroyed the military barricade. The floodgates of his body opened and a voice boomed from within. Attitude. It was Lord Drakkon's voice. The quirkless didn't hesitate. They ran towards the Dragon Zord, and when the last passenger was safe, the Colossus dived back into the depths, escaping from a country that considered them less than human. The broadcasts captured everything. The whole world saw it. Island was a refuge. Drakkon and his empress were freeing the quirkless, and the governments of the world were terrified. Because they could no longer hide it, the revolution had begun and the old world was doomed. For a full month, the same pattern was repeated across the world. Each day the Phoenixert descended upon the airports, wiping out any resistance and freeing the quirkless, while the Dragon Zord emerged from the depths, destroying the blockades at the ports and carrying off the oppressed. Nations tried to resist, but the result was always the same, and when governments finally tried to fight back, Serpentera responded. The North Korean dictator believed he could defy the new reality, that his regime was still in control and could still crush the quirkless under fear. He gathered the country's heroes, ordered them to crush any uprising, gave them permission to kill. But the people were no longer afraid. They were no longer slaves. Now they were followers of Drakkon, and when the oppression intensified, Serpentera descended from the sky. The mechanical dragon covered the sun with its immense size. Its shadow spread over Pyongyang. The capital was filled with screams. Soldiers tried to shoot. Heroes tried to resist, but it was all useless, and with a single roar from Serpentera the city was wiped off the map. No one survived. The dictator died without even understanding what hit him, and the message was clear to the rest of the world. After the fall of North Korea, governments laid down their weapons. Leaders could no longer ignore the truth, no longer sustaining their illusion of power. Because they knew they would be next if they resisted, fear gripped the nations. Heroes began to desert. The quirkless continued to escape. Each day, Island grew more crowded, and the world realized something terrifying. Drakkon was no longer just an enemy. He was the new ruler of the planet, and no one could stop him. During that month Island changed from an abandoned island to a relic of a bygone era. It had become a home, a refuge for the oppressed. The quirkless who were once rejected in their countries now walked with their heads held high. Children who were once victims of abuse in schools now ran and laughed in the parks. Without fear, discrimination or the burden of being considered inferior, on Island everyone was equal. Adults who were never able to work in what they wanted took their places in the island's laboratories and factories. Engineers, scientists, doctors, builders. People society had ignored were now showing their true worth, the island running more efficiently than any nation, because here, no one was useless, everyone had a purpose, but not everyone stayed in the labs, many chose a different path. Military training. Every day, at the Island training grounds, hundreds of people trained tirelessly, running, fighting, and learning to handle weapons enhanced with the morphin grid. Because they didn't just want to be citizens of this new world, they wanted to protect it, and at the end of that month the first Sentinel Rangers were born, the defenders of the new order. They had no quirks, they didn't have the gifts that the previous society oppressed them with, but they had determination, they had power. Each Sentinel received special armor, forged with the technology of the morphin grid. They were fast, strong, indomitable, and at the heart of their training was loyalty to Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress. Because they saved them, they gave them a reason to live. Now, no one would trample on them again. Island was not just a refuge, it was a nation, an army, and with each passing day the time drew closer when the old world would be completely replaced. The world was in crisis. The leaders of the most powerful nations on the planet met in an emergency session. The UN Security Council had never been this tense even in wartime, because this was worse than any war. 20% of the world's population had migrated, its citizens now served Lord Drakkon. The workforce, scientists and soldiers had abandoned them, and they could do nothing to stop him or they would suffer the fury of Serpentera. Monitors projected satellite images of Island. What they saw made some world leaders pale. Island was no longer just a floating city. It was an impossible fortress, the once advanced technology now incomprehensible, structures glowing with the energy of the morphin grid, defense towers towering with weapons systems no country possessed, factories mass-producing equipment at inhuman speeds. And the most terrifying thing was that Drakkon's army kept growing. There were hundreds of Sentinel Rangers every day, more recruits were training on the battlefields of Island, more scientists were designing new technology. Island was advancing at a level that the entire world couldn't match. The balance of power was broken. The President of the United States banged the table. This is unacceptable. China's leader frowned. We lost our best engineers. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom sighed in frustration. Our economy will collapse in months. The French representative clenched his fists. The quirkless in our countries hate us. The President of Russia rubbed his face. Every attempt at attack has been a failure. The images of Serpentera destroying North Korea were still fresh in their minds. No one wanted to be next. What do we do? Asked the UN Secretary General. No one responded immediately, because no one had a solution. If they attacked, they would die. If they negotiated, they would kneel. If they waited, Island would become even stronger. There was no way out and the world was beginning to accept reality. Lord Drakkon was not a threat. He was the new sovereign of the planet. Every day his empire only grew larger. At first, no one cared. The quirkless were leaving en masse. Thousands of them abandoned their countries every day, but society would not miss them, or at least, that's what they thought. The media downplayed migration. Politicians said it was irrelevant. Heroes claimed society would remain the same. After all, what did the quirkless matter? They had no special abilities. They weren't heroes, they weren't important, but in a matter of weeks the whole world collapsed. Hospitals began to run out of nurses and medical technicians. Quirkless people made up 70% of the healthcare staff. With their exodus, hospitals collapsed, emergencies couldn't be treated, operating rooms emptied, pharmacies couldn't handle the demand, and deaths increased. The streets were filled with garbage. The cleaning and sanitation workers were quirkless. With them gone, waste piled up. Rats multiplied, diseases spread, the stench of garbage covered the wealthier neighborhoods. The same people who said the quirkless were useless now lived in their own filth. Schools were left without teachers, because most were quirkless. Classrooms closed, students were sent home. Some heroes tried to take the role of teachers, but failed. Being a hero did not mean knowing how to teach. Education collapsed in a matter of weeks, parents blamed the government, and the government had no answers. Factories stopped working, technicians, engineers and machine operators were all quirkless, assembly lines ground to a halt, exports plummeted. Businesses lost billions, economies faltered, investors panicked, and for the first time, the world understood the truth: quirkless weren't useless. They were the foundation of society, the backbone of every nation, and now they were on an island alongside Lord Drakkon. Social media was filled with panic. Why didn't anyone tell us that we depended on them? I thought they were just cargo, but they're the ones keeping everything running. Heroes can't save us from this. The media tried to control the narrative, but it was impossible, as the truth was right in front of them. The world was in crisis and there was only one nation that prospered: Island, the city of the quirkless, the empire of Lord Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress. The last hope for those who were despised. The world knew that sooner or later they would have to bend the knee to them. Nezu looked at his chessboard. A month ago, he still believed there was a way to win. That he could anticipate Drakkon, make an unexpected move, but now, the game was over. Checkmate. The check was when Drakkon revealed his identity and his queen, when Melissa presented herself to the world as the Phoenix Empress and they announced the truth to the world. The mate was when the quirkless began to migrate, the foundations of society collapsed and the countries that tried to stop them were destroyed. Nezu closed his eyes. There was no possible move to reverse this. The game had been lost before it even began. UA and all the hero academies in the world began to lose students. The parents made an irreversible decision. They did not want their children to be sacrificed by a system that was already dead, to try to stop what could not be stopped. Because they saw it with their own eyes, Korea tried to subdue the quirkless and disappeared from the map. Serpentera erased them without mercy. Families no longer trusted the heroes. Parents withdrew their children from UA. I don't want my son to die facing something he can't win. Heroes are no longer the world's hope. What's the point of being a hero if people don't need us anymore? The students watched the chaos and feared, some already wondering if they were on the right side. Others knew it was too late to change and Nezu just watched, because there was nothing he could do anymore. Nezu lifted the last piece on his board. The White King, his king, looked at it with a tired smile. We underestimated you, Drakkon. And with a sigh he knocked down the piece. The game was over. The world belonged to Lord Drakkon. The hero society was dead. The dream of becoming heroes had crumbled. Now, each of the UA alumni had to find their own path. Some succeeded while others were not so lucky, but they all lived under the same shadow, the shadow of Lord Drakkon, and no one knew when he would make his next move. Some were able to adapt. Mei Hatsume, with her innate genius, found work in the technology industry. She didn't care about heroes, she just wanted to keep building. Itsuka Kendo, with her natural leadership, took control of the family dojo. Her determination made her a martial arts master and find a way to survive. Kyoka returned to music. Her talent was always there, but the pressure of being a heroine made her move away from her true passion. For them, the world moved on. Shoto Todoroki, Iida Tenya and Momo Yaoyorozu managed to remain stable. They came from powerful families and their names still had weight. Their parents' connections and their money allowed them not to lose everything. But they had still failed. Shoto saw the death of his father. Momo lost the purpose that had guided her all her life. Iida wondered if the rules he had always followed were really worth anything because the world no longer responded to those rules. Now, the power was in Drakkon's hands. But for others, the end of heroes was a death sentence. Uraraka Ochako and Ojiro Mashirao didn't have wealthy families. They didn't have inheritances or businesses waiting for them. Being heroes was their only way to give their families a better future, and now that future was gone. Uraraka looked for work anywhere she could, but with no experience outside of the heroic world, no one would hire her. Ojiro tried to use his training to work in private security, but in a world where heroes were falling, security was no longer a priority. The little they had crumbled day after day. And in their desperation, they both looked towards Island. They knew that there were opportunities there. The quirkless were thriving, and although they still did not admit it out loud, the thought was there: what if we made a mistake? Nimori Kayama decided that her battle was not on the field, but in the mind. She opened a small clinic in Musudafu, helping those who, like her, had been shattered by the collapse of the world. Recovery Girl returned to the general hospital. Now there were more injured outside UA than inside. Suffering was everywhere and heroes were not the priority. They all had one thing in common. They knew this wasn't over. Lord Drakkon had taken over the world without firing a single bullet. He had only freed the quirkless. He had let society destroy itself. They knew he wasn't done, and sooner or later, Lord Drakkon would make his next move, and when he did, no one would be ready. The wind roared in the upper atmosphere at hypersonic speed. A fighter jet was approaching Island. Upon its fuselage, standing with an imposing and defiant presence, Kathleen Bate, Star and Stripe, America's #1, the only person on Earth with a power capable of challenging Lord Drakkon. New Order, the ultimate quirk, with a simple phrase, could rewrite the rules of the world, and today, his goal was clear: kill Lord Drakkon. Meanwhile, in the depths of the ocean, the waves split in two, the currents altered with their advance. From the bottom of the abyss, a colossus emerged, Godzilla, the greatest kaiju hero in the world. His quirk was at its maximum. His body had reached 300 meters in height. Each movement of his tail stirred the ocean with tsunamis. Each of his roars resounded like a storm on the horizon. The world believed Lord Drakkon was invincible, but the United States government was not willing to give up. They had sent their two greatest weapons. His best warrior and his greatest monster. This was his last play. If this failed, the entire world would fall under Drakkon's fist. They both knew what was at stake. Kathleen clenched her fists and Godzilla roared with fury. Island was in sight, the horizon lit with fire and destruction as Serpentera attacked, the colossal mechanical dragon launching a single attack that destroyed much of the jet squadron. Explosions flashed across the sky. As burning debris fell into the ocean, Star and Stripe barely had time to react. His eyes lit up with determination. He raised his hand and declared in a firm voice, "If Serpentera moves, she'll self-destruct." The morphin grid vibrated. The power of Star and Stripes will enter the mechanical colossus, and it was paralyzed. For the first time in its existence, the dragon could not move. The sky was filled with an overwhelming silence. She had done it. She had stopped Drakkon's most powerful weapon, but before she could breathe a sigh of relief, a voice echoed in her ear. "That was impressive." Star and Stripe turned immediately, feeling it before seeing it, an inhuman presence and absolute oppression. On the wing of the jet on which she was riding, Lord Drakkon appeared, dressed in his white and gold suit, his helmet in the shape of a dragon. In his posture, there was no concern. Just curious. Star and Stripe kept calm. "Drakkon." Izuku smiled under his helmet. "So America's #1 has come to kill me." Star and Stripe were already analyzing him. Serpentera was under their control, but now they had to take care of him. They couldn't waste time since Godzilla was already fighting in the ocean. The water split violently. Waves collided like mountains at war. The Dragonzord lunged at Godzilla, the two colossi colliding with a force that shook the seas. Godzilla's roar shook the waters. His fist slammed into the Dragonzord, sending it several kilometers back, but the Zord didn't fall. Instead, it immediately stabilized. While on the horizon, Godzilla saw something that made him curse. The Phoenixzord was approaching. The Phoenix Empress was entering the battle. He had to be quick. If he didn't finish off the Dragonzord before the Phoenixzord arrived, he would be at a great disadvantage. In the air, Kathleen made a decision. Lord Drakkon was her target. Serpentera was blocked and Godzilla was fighting the Dragonzord. He had to attack now, because if he failed, the whole world would fall into darkness and there would be no second chances. "New Order," he shouted at the top of his lungs. Reality bent to his will, and with a murderous glare he spoke the words that would change the fate of the planet. "Lord Drakkon will die." As the ocean roared with the battle of titans, each blow from Godzilla generated colossal waves, and each attack from the Dragonzord shook the sea like an underwater earthquake. But Godzilla was superior, bigger, stronger and more indestructible. The Dragonzord's finger missiles bounced off his scaly skin. His drilled tail couldn't pierce him. Nothing the Dragonzord threw could harm him. Godzilla roared with fury, grabbed the Dragonzord by the tail, twisted it brutally. The machine was lifted like a simple toy, and with a final monstrous movement he threw it into the sky. The Dragonzord shot out like a missile, moving away from the battle. Godzilla expected its fall to destroy it, that the impact with the ocean would tear it apart from within. But then the sky burned with golden fire. From the clouds, the Phoenixzord descended, its wings glowing with pure energy. The air heated up, evaporating the water in its path. Inside the cockpit was Melissa, the Phoenix Empress. His blue eyes were cold as steel. In his hand, he held the dragon dagger, the ancient relic of Drakkon. capable of controlling the Dragonzord, and taking a breath he made it sound with its characteristic melody. The Dragonzord roared in the air and in an instant stabilized itself, controlling its fall. It was not destroyed, because Melissa had called it, and she was not alone. She took her morpher, pressing her communicator, and spoke with a firm voice. Tigerzord, wake up. From my island, the Tigerzord activated. Its eyes flashed with a white glow, its engines roared, its body rose, ready for war, and without hesitation it jumped from the floating island. She descended into battle like a comet of destruction. The fight was not over yet, and Melissa was going to show Godzilla that he was not the only Titan in these seas. Godzilla prepared to intercept the Tigerzord as it fell, but in the air something impossible was happening. The Zords began to combine. A storm of morphin grid energy lit up the sky. The Dragonzord reconfigured, its limbs transforming into legs and a torso. The Tigerzord separated, forming the arms of the colossal figure being born, and the Phoenixzord descended, its head fusing with its body, forming the helmet and core of the Titan. The Emperor Megazord was born amidst golden lightning and scarlet flames, its body colossal, fusing the ferocity of the dragon, the strength of the tiger, and the majesty of the phoenix. Its wings, once part of the Phoenixzord, became a towering red and gold shield. The Dragonzord's tail extended, transforming into a giant spear, capable of piercing even the toughest skin. Godzilla looked at the Titan before him. For the first time in his life he felt something akin to fear. Inside the Emperor Megazord cockpit, Melissa smiled. Did you really think you could take us on? The Megazord advanced and Godzilla roared in fury, launching himself with his colossal strength, but Melissa already had the advantage. Let's go to hell. The Emperor Megazord charged with its spear, and the Phoenix's wing shield ignited, covering it with golden flames. The seas shook. The air ignited with fire and energy as the two Titans launched themselves at each other. The United Nations Security Council was completely silent. All the world leaders, top military commanders, generals and strategists watched in horror as the satellite broadcast on giant screens showed the ocean roaring with fury. At first, Godzilla seemed to have the advantage. His size surpassed the Dragonzord, his blows moved the entire ocean. He was the ultimate beast. The most powerful kaiju hero in the world. Seeing his brutality in combat, the generals were relieved. Yes, he can do it. Godzilla is stronger. The Dragonzord isn't enough. But then from the skies, the Phoenixzord descended, its light illuminating the waves like a golden sunrise, and with a single command the three Zords merged together. The UN hall filled with nervous murmurs, leaders paled, and strategists frantically took notes. What the hell is that thing? They merged. Since when can they do that? How does Island have this kind of technology? But no questions mattered. The battle had changed. The ocean shook as the colossi collided. Godzilla roared in fury, throwing his massive fists while the Emperor Megazord raised its golden shield, and when Godzilla impacted against it, the fire of the morphin grid consumed him, the golden flames burning on his skin. For the first time Godzilla felt pain, and the generals looked at the screen in terror. No. It can't be. The Emperor Megazord was not only the same size as Godzilla but also matched him in power, and when Melissa charged the spear, the entire world held its breath. The Dragonzord's tail, now a gigantic spear, ignited with pure energy, piercing through its scales as if they were made of paper. Godzilla roared in agony, his blood mixed with the ocean waters, and at the UN, the world leaders understood the truth. We can't win. That technology, that power, it's not something we can fight. Some leaders slumped in their seats, defeated, others clutched their desks, trembling. What they saw on the screen was the end of their world. Lord Drakkon was no longer just a leader of a rebellion, he was an absolute emperor, and his empress was the goddess of war. If they could do this to a kaiju hero, what would stop them from doing the same to the rest of the planet? Lord Drakkon had no rivals, only subjects who didn't know it yet. Godzilla's roar echoed across the ocean, waves rising like mountains with every blow he landed. His strength was legendary, his endurance was unmatched. He was the most powerful kaiju hero in the world, but the Emperor Megazord was impossible technology, the absolute power of the morphin grid, and in this battle there could only be one victor. Even with his body wounded and burned by the golden flames, Godzilla did not retreat. He did not give up, and with a final roar he charged with all his power, launching himself against the Emperor Megazord. If he was going to fall, he would take his enemy with him, but Melissa was already expecting it. You're strong. His voice echoed in the cabin. But there are more of us. Godzilla launched his punch and the Emperor Megazord raised its shield again. The golden flames intensified, and when Godzilla impacted against it, the sacred fire devoured it. The Colossus roared in agony. Her scales, indestructible to any other weapon, cracked under the energy of the Morphin grid. Her attack had been stopped. Her desperation was palpable, and before she could recover, Melissa attacked. The Emperor Megazord spun with pinpoint precision, the spear burning with infinite energy, and with a brutal swing, it pierced Godzilla's heart. Godzilla froze. His body trembled. The spear pierced his chest, exiting through his back. The ocean turned red. He tried to roar one last time, but his voice was drowned by the blood in his throat. His eyes flashed with fury, despair, and denial, but then they went out, and his body began to fall into the sea, which once shook with his fury, now received him in silence. The wave of his fall extended for miles. Godzilla was dead. Inside the cabin, Melissa sighed, remembering when she first saw Godzilla at an island parade. Rest in peace, Godzilla. The Emperor Megazord rose above the ocean, its shield burning with the fire of its triumph. Lord Drakkon will die. The power of the New Order roared like an invisible force. Reality bent, the rules of the universe changed, and in an instant, Lord Drakkon stopped. The air grew heavy, the sound faded over the horizon, and the island's sensors went haywire. Star and Stripe had done it. The world held its breath. The Emperor who had bent the world and no one had been able to stop was finally paralyzed, but under his helmet, Drakkon smiled. Kathleen saw him. His body did not move, but his presence had not changed in the slightest. There was no surprise or fear, only amusement, satisfaction and mockery. His voice broke the silence. It's definitely a good trick. Fear gripped Star and Stripe. This wasn't possible. New Order had affected him. He should be dead. New Order had dictated his death, and yet, he was still there. Drakkon moved calmly, as if he hadn't been affected at all, as if the rules of the world didn't apply to him. His laughter under his helmet could no longer be contained. Did you really think it would work? Kathleen stepped back, her mind trying to understand, and before she could react, Drakkon raised his hand. In his palm appeared Rita Repulsa's scepter. The scepter glowed with ancient power. Dark energy rumbled through the air, turning the sky gold and green. Kathleen fell to her knees, a horrible pain piercing her chest, her body shaking as she coughed up blood, her mind fragmented, and in that instant, she realized she couldn't win. Drakkon leaned over her. New Order is an awesome quirk, but it has a problem. His voice was cruel and patient. You need to understand what it affects. Kathleen trembled. She had made a catastrophic mistake. New Order had tried to impose a rule on something she didn't understand. Lord Drakkon wasn't just Izuku Midoriya or Tommy Oliver. He was something more, something she could never understand. You could never understand the vastness of the multiverse. You could never see what I have seen, and you could never understand what I truly am. Drakkon raised his scepter. And that's why you could never kill me. Star and Stripe tried to move, to scream, to reactivate the New Order, but her body wouldn't respond. Her mind was slowly breaking, and when Drakkon unleashed the scepter's energy upon her, her very existence began to crumble. The gods of the old world were falling, but Star and Stripe could not afford to lose. Serpentero was still paralyzed by New Order, but his body was falling apart. Every second that passed, his life was extinguished a little more, and yet he moved forward. She threw herself at Drakkon, because even if her body failed and her mind broke, she still had her training, her will, her duty, and if she was going to die, she would take him with her. Star and Stripe unleashed everything they had. Punches, kicks, locks, counterattacks, hand-to-hand combat was their specialty, but Drakkon was something else. His movements were perfect, each blow flowing with mathematical precision, each attack a deadly work of art, a dance of violence and technique. Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, Karate, Taekwondo, Ninjutsu, all styles in one body, but the worst was not her fists, it was the dark sorcery of her scepter. Each blow from Rita Repulsa's magic wand pierced her defense, each discharge of energy tore her being. If he weren't on the receiving end of the blows, he might be able to admire the beauty of Drakkon's combat mastery, but his awareness faded with each impact. Drakkon's roundhouse kick caught her in the chest, her body was thrown from the fighter jet, the void opened before her, and when she fell into the ocean her body shattered like glass. Star and Stripe vanished into the waters, But before their existence was completely extinguished, the last thing they saw was the Emperor Megazord. In its last moment of life it witnessed the death of Godzilla. The Megazord's spear pierced his heart, the Titan's roar drowned in his own blood. When the battle ended, the sea swallowed the bodies of the two warriors and the last defender of the old order was erased from history. Only silence remained. The fuselage of the fighter jet was still burning with the remains of the battle, the storm of dark energy and golden fire still vibrated in the air. Star and Stripe had been defeated and Godzilla had fallen. The fighter jet pilot tried to make an evasive maneuver to shake Lord Drakkon off, but before he could do anything Drakkon raised his scepter. Fly away. A dark explosion pierced the cockpit, the pilot screamed for a moment, and then disappeared in a flash of black energy. The jet fell in flames into the ocean and as it descended, Drakkon landed on top of the Emperor Megazord. Inside the cockpit, Melissa's hands flew over the controls, island systems synchronized with her morpher, UN satellites, military radars, news servers, all were hacked. The whole world watched the broadcast. In the center of the screen appeared the Phoenix Empress, her eyes shining coldly, serene, elegant and indomitable. Listen carefully. His voice resonated in every corner of the planet. Star and Stripe and Godzilla's attack on Island will be considered an act of terrorism. The United Nations froze, the generals stared at the screen in horror, the surviving heroes clenched their fists. They tried to destroy our home, kill our citizens, steal our technology. Melissa smiled coldly. They thought they could kill the dragon. Melissa leaned over the camera, her helmet reflecting the golden flames of the ocean. But now you'll understand why you should never disturb a sleeping dragon. The message was cut off, and the entire world felt the weight of those words. Leaders knew what they meant. The UN was no longer the one dictating the rules, nations no longer controlled the fate of the planet. Drakkon and his Empress now decided the course of history. The question was no longer whether they could stop him, it was how much time they had left before he decided to destroy them. The dragon had awakened and his fire would consume the old world. The Phoenixerd's cockpit was completely silent, the battle was over, Godzilla was dead, Star and Stripe had been destroyed, and the Phoenix Empress's message had shaken the world. Izuku looked at Melissa. She had commanded the Megazord alone, a feat that not even the original Rangers could have done easily. Piloting a Zord was a challenge in itself. But an entire Megazord, that was another level. Any other would have taken an entire team to synchronize and she had done it alone. And not only that, it was Melissa who took the initiative to respond to the attack, without hesitation or fear, only with the absolute power of an empress. Izuku knew she was strong and her mind was brilliant, but now he saw something else in her, her dominant, fierce side, and he had to admit that it turned him on. Melissa was breathing heavily, her body still shaking from the adrenaline. This had been her first real battle, the first time she had fought for her nation and had won. She had proven that she was not just a scientist, she was a warrior, the Phoenix Empress. Her heart was beating furiously, her hands were still warm from the fight, and all she felt at this moment was desire for the man who had made this possible. Desire for the man who looked at her with a devouring fire in his eyes. Melissa turned to him. Izuku didn't look away, his breathing became heavier. The energy of the morphin grid vibrated in the air between them, the tension became unbearable, until Melissa released the controls of her Zord and without hesitation launched herself at him. Izuku fell back onto the metal floor of the cabin. Melissa looked down at him, her lips parted and her eyes burning with desire. Izuku smiled. Dominant, huh? Melissa didn't respond with words. He just leaned closer and claimed her lips with a hungry kiss. The Phoenixerd landed on the island platform. The hatches opened with a hiss of steam and energy. From within emerged its rulers, Lord Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress. Melissa descended first, her skin still burning, her face flushed with a faint blush from the adrenaline of the battle, the ecstasy of victory, and what had happened in the Phoenixerd's cockpit. Everything had her in a state of euphoria. Her posture was confident, but her clothes were in disarray. Her ranger outfit had creases in places it hadn't before. Her lips were still slightly swollen. It was then that she realized. Shit, he didn't have his underwear. Behind her, Lord Drakkon calmly descended, his smile impossible to hide. He leaned gently towards her ear and with his low, mocking voice made her shudder. If you want them back, I'm more than willing to give you a rematch. Melissa turned to look at him, the glint of defiance in her blue eyes immediate. Rematch. She leaned toward him, close enough for her lips to brush against his. I think you forgot who was up and who was down. Drakkon let out a deep laugh. Melissa was fierce and that made him want her even more. The guards and scientists of Island watched their empress walk confidently, victorious, radiant, undisputed, and at her side, the dragon that the world feared. The defeat of Star and Stripe and Godzilla marked a point of no return. The world had witnessed the absolute failure of the heroes. With the declaration of war by the Phoenix Empress, the United Nations no longer had any options. At an emergency meeting, world leaders approved drastic measures: first global martial law, governments taking full control of their nations, citizens living under curfew, and protests being put down with violence. Second, mandatory recruitment. Anyone with an offensive quirk would be recruited, regardless of age or experience. The registered heroes were no longer enough, so they made desperate decisions. Third, they offered pardon to criminals accused of vigilantism. They would receive amnesty if they swore to fight against Island. And finally, students from hero academies would be sent to the front lines, not as heroes in training, but as soldiers. Nezu was present at the meeting with the Japanese government and UN representatives, the only director of a hero academy who still had influence. When the student mobilization was approved, he slammed his claw on the table. This isn't a war, he said in an icy voice. It's a mass sacrifice. The leaders didn't respond. Nezu stood up from his seat. Do you really think these kids can take on Drakkon, after what he did to Star and Stripe? After how he destroyed Godzilla? The representative of the United States spoke coldly. We have no choice. Nezu gave a bitter laugh. Don't they have a choice? His sharp gaze swept the room. Or do they not have the courage to accept that they have already lost? An awkward silence fell over the council. Everyone knew Nezu was right. Challenging Lord Drakkon meant certain death. Nezu sighed and crossed his arms. There is only one possible outcome to this war. Everyone looked at him, waiting for him to offer a strategy or give them hope, but what he said terrified them. He's going to exterminate us. The room fell into absolute silence. They knew he was right. They weren't fighting a man. Lord Drakkon had no mercy, but the government believed they could use Ua as a military base, and by taking control away from Nezu, they would have an army of young heroes ready to be sent to the front. But Nezu wasn't going to allow it. If the world was doomed, at least he would make sure that his students weren't sacrificed in vain. When the government agents arrived to take control of the academy, Nezu was gone, and with him all traces of the students had disappeared. There were no physical files, no digital records, and no databases of names, addresses, or skills. UA's ID system was completely empty, as if no student had ever existed. The agents paled. Everything was erased. Nezu had destroyed every bit of information. If they wanted to send children to die, they would have to find them themselves. Nezu left them a message in the teacher's lounge. It was a hologram of his figure with his characteristic smile, but this time his gaze was not kind. It was that of someone who had accepted the end of the game. They took Ua, but they didn't take anything of value. I won't allow them to send my students to certain death. This war is already lost, and when Drakkon destroys them, remember that it was you who gave him the perfect excuse. The message was cut off. Nezu had disappeared. In the tallest tower on Island that rose above the ocean, a fortress in the skies, inside, in the most sheltered room in the world, Lord Drakkon lay in his bed, his gaze fixed on the ceiling, his mind working tirelessly. The Island army was ready. Thousands of quirkless who had been scorned were now warriors. Each of them had their own Sentinel Ranger morpher, the morphin grid fueling them with power. The island's factories and laboratories churned out weapons and armor, advanced technology that no army on Earth could match. But for tonight, for this one night, the war could wait. On his chest, he felt his true victory. Melissa slept peacefully, her body naked under the sheets. Her breathing was soft, peaceful. The glow of the moon drew her silhouette on him. Her skin, marked by her passion, and her lips, still slightly swollen from the kisses they had shared. Izuku raised a hand and slid his fingers down her back, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. For tonight, they weren't emperors, they were just Izuku and Melissa. Drakkon closed his eyes for a moment. He knew what was coming. The world would try to hold on. The old order would cling to its death throes. Soon, he would have to bathe the earth in fire and ash. But tonight, with Melissa in his arms, he allowed peace to embrace him one last time. The next morning, the rising sun illuminated Island in its full glory. The floating city, the bastion of the quirkless, now stood as the capital of the New World. From the balcony of the central tower, Lord Drakkon and the Phoenix Empress watched its creation. Thousands of Sentinel Rangers gathered in the central plaza, each one a loyal warrior, not because they feared Drakkon, but because they believed in him and Melissa, in their destiny. Lord Drakkon knew that the past would not have allowed this. The Drakkon of before would have created an army based on terror, driven by fear, and that would eventually betray him. As Kimberly and Bulk did. But now that was not necessary. Thanks to the fusion with Izuku Midoriya, he now knew how to inspire loyalty instead of terror. These warriors were not slaves. They were soldiers, believers, the instruments of the new era. Melissa, wearing her red dress, looked at her village with Izuku by her side, and with a voice that resonated throughout the island they both spoke in unison. Today we declare the beginning of the new era. The Sentinel Rangers roared to the sky. Today, the old world will burn in its own arrogance. The soldiers raised their fists. Today, the Phoenix and the Dragon bring the justice that was denied to us. The roar of the army shook the heavens. With a single movement, Melissa and Drakkon raised their morphers to the sky. The energy of the morphin grid vibrated in the air. In an instant, thousands of morphers activated in unison. The energy shone like a storm of emerald and scarlet colors. Armors materialized on their bodies. The Sentinel Rangers were ready for war. In that moment, the entire world felt that the future had changed forever. It was no longer a war between heroes and villains. It was the annihilation of the old order, the day the Earth knew the true meaning of the word empire. Melissa and Izuku descended from the tower, walking confidently towards Island's main hangar. Inside, the Empire's war machines awaited. Serpentera, the Phoenixerd and the Helicouriers, enhanced with the energy of the Morphin grid. The factories of Island had worked tirelessly. Now their ships could defy the laws of physics. They did not need fuel or conventional energy. They operated with the same essence of the multiverse. Melissa adjusted her morpher on her wrist, her gaze burning with conviction. "I'll take the White House." Izuku nodded, not taking his eyes off the ascending Helicouriers. "I'll take care of the UN headquarters." It was a calculated move. If they took over the global power centers, the entire world would bow to them without so many collateral casualties. The Sentinel Ranger squads had already received their orders. The others will take control of the powers that still possess nuclear weapons. If the UN was planning resistance, if they even thought about using their nuclear arsenal, it would be taken away from them before they could react. Melissa climbed into the Phoenixerd's cockpit. Izuku placed a hand on Serpentera's cold structure. The Morphin grid vibrated around them. The sky darkened with the presence of the Helicouriers. The floodgates opened. It was time. Izuku looked at Melissa one last time. She looked back with a confident smile. "See you when the world belongs to us." Izuku laughed softly. "He belongs to us now, Melissa. We're just going to remind him." The engines roared. The mechanical colossi took off. The atmosphere at the UN headquarters in Geneva was tense and suffocating. Not even 24 hours had passed since the fall of Kathleen Bate and Godzilla. The world knew that war was inevitable. The question was no longer how to win, but how long they could survive. The discussions in the Great Hall were interrupted. The walls shook. The windows vibrated and a colossal roar tore through the sky. Serpentera had arrived. The shadow of the Titan covered the entire city. The diplomats panicked while the guards tried to call for reinforcements, but it was too late. The doors to the conference room slammed open, lights flickered, and an escort of Sentinel Rangers entered with synchronized steps, each of them armed, disciplined, unwavering. They were not simple soldiers. They were the symbol of the new era. The diplomats were surrounded. No one could escape while one man advanced with absolute calm. Lord Drakkon, with his white suit and golden armor, his presence crushing the will of everyone in the room. Lord Drakkon stepped onto the central podium, stood silent for a moment, looking at the world leaders, saw them tremble and clutch their useless papers and documents. In a deep and confident voice, he spoke. "I understand this is the venue where the peace terms are being discussed." His gaze scanned the room with cruel amusement. "Well, I'm here to offer you exactly that." The diplomats looked at each other. There was hope in their eyes, but Drakkon crushed it with his next sentence. "Rindance." The silence was absolute. The leaders held their breath. "I'm not here to negotiate, debate, or justify the inevitable." He leaned slightly toward the microphone. "Bow before me or I'll destroy you." The weight of those words fell upon the room. The old world had come to an end. The Emperor of the multiverse had come to claim it. Meanwhile, the sky of Washington, D.C. darkened with the arrival of the Phoenixzord. Its golden wings shone like an artificial sun, announcing the arrival of the Phoenix Empress. Before the defense systems could be activated, Melissa had already hacked them. The turrets fell silent, the radars went dark, and security protocols failed in an instant. The White House had no way to respond. In that moment, America's future was decided. The Phoenixzord's floodgates opened, and from inside, Melissa descended with absolute elegance, her Phoenix Ranger suit gleaming in the sunlight, and behind her, an escort of Sentinel Rangers marched in perfect formation. The White House was completely surrounded, and Melissa walked through the halls with absolute calm, each step an echo of history being written, each door that opened marked the surrender of an outdated system, and finally, she arrived at the Oval Office. Inside, the last ruler of a country that no longer existed waited, the President of the United States. A man with a lava-spitting quirk, a man who wouldn't accept defeat without a fight. His eyes blazed with fury, his fist clenched with determination, and his mouth opened to launch his first attack, but Melissa interrupted him before he could. "If you shoot, all you'll achieve is melting your own grave." The president froze. "You're a traitor," the man roared, his voice shaking with frustration. Melissa blinked calmly. Traitor, the word didn't make the slightest impact on her, it only produced a small smile. "How can you betray a country you've never lived in?" The president was speechless. Melissa stepped forward. "My father took me to Island when I was a child, because from the moment I was diagnosed as quirkless, he knew what would happen if I stayed here." His voice turned icy. "I knew I would never be accepted, never be considered an equal, so don't talk to me about betrayal." Melissa approached slowly. "I am not a citizen of the United States, I am the Phoenix Empress, and this is no longer your country." The president tried to respond, but before he could open his mouth, Melissa raised her morpher, and in a flash of golden fire, it was all over. Nezu turned off the screen and sighed, his mind processing all the possibilities. They had lost. Japan had fallen, the White House was in the hands of Melissa Shield, and the UN had surrendered. Lord Drakkon hadn't just conquered the world, he'd shaped it in his image. But something kept bothering him. "Nimari, what do you think the commission will do now?" the director asked, turning his small head toward the woman. Nimari watched the broadcast with concern. She rubbed her temples, feeling the pressure of the situation. If the commission continues to operate in the shadows, they have only one option. Nezu nodded. They both knew the Hero Commission would never accept defeat. And if they'd already tried to kill Izuku before, now they'd be willing to do the unthinkable. Van a liberare all for one. Nimari gulped. The ancient demon king. The villain who had ruled Japan before All Might's arrival. The immortal beast that even the prison of Tartarus could only contain, not destroy. If they free him, he won't fight for them, we know that, Nimari said, her voice strained. He'll want to take what's left of the world for himself. Nezu frowned. That was the real threat. All for One was not just a monster, he was a parasite, a cancer, and once they set him free they could no longer stop him. Nezu stood up, his tiny body vibrating with determination. If Lord Drakkon realizes this before his time, he will raise Japan without hesitation. We can't allow the commission to provoke him. The corridors of Tartarus's 6th level were cold, dark, and permeated with an almost oppressive silence. There weren't many guards left, and those still there were only following orders, fearing what slumbered behind the thick, reinforced walls. The president of the Hero Commission strode forward, her gaze hidden behind the shadows of her face. In her right hand, she held a briefcase containing the final access codes, the key to freeing the most dangerous being the world had ever known before Lord Drakkon. The air was thick with an unnatural feeling, as if the place itself rejected the presence of its prisoner. Finally, he arrived at the only cell deep within the cold metal hell, All for One's personal prison. The door was a black titanium monolith, protected by multiple layers of containment technology and energy barriers. But at that moment, what worried her most wasn't the security measures, but the voice that greeted her from the other side of the cell. Well, the Hero Commission comes to me with a proposal. Are they that desperate? The president kept her expression neutral as a thin crack in the door opened, revealing a glowing red aura that could be seen from the darkness of her cell. Lord Drakkon has taken over the world, she said firmly. Every nation has fallen, the UN has surrendered, the heroes are either dead or have joined him. The order we have built is destroyed. All for One's aura danced around him with almost amused interest. "And what do you expect from me?" His voice was soft, dangerous. Tamura was annihilated before he could reach his true potential. "Do you think I can just go out and defeat this conqueror?" The president clenched her fist. She couldn't show weakness. "We know you can't take his power." All for One remained silent for a moment, processing her words. "So you've discovered the truth." Her tone turned almost melancholic. "Drakkon and his morphin grid, a power that doesn't belong to this world, isn't a quirk, and isn't something I can copy, steal, or absorb. It's an anomaly, an aberration. But he's still a man." The president took a step forward. "And men can die." The prisoner gave a low, reverberating laugh, full of malice. "You ask me to face a god dressed as a warrior. I'm giving you the chance to reclaim the world you lost," she replied harshly. "Lead our forces, rally the survivors, find a way to defeat him." All for One's laughter stopped abruptly. The air in the cell seemed to grow heavier, denser. "And what will you gain, Madam President?" She raised her chin. "If the world remains under Drakkon's rule, then the concept of heroes will disappear, the commission will have no purpose, and our vision of order will crumble, but if you win, we can rebuild." All for One was silent for a long moment. He knew he couldn't beat Drakkon with brute force, but he also didn't underestimate the power of all the quirks he still had in his possession. Finally, he leaned into the crack in the door and whispered in a voice that chilled the president's blood. "Open the cell." She slid the briefcase into the security reader, the emergency lights flashed, the alarms went off. Containment seals deactivated, mobility restrictions removed, Tartarus protocol cancelled. The imposing door slowly opened and All for One could barely contain his laughter. 200 years of planning, battles and sacrifices to seal him in the abyss, from his younger brother, Yoichi, to Nana and Toshinori, all those who inherited One for All had given their lives and their families to try to eradicate his legacy, and now, the same institution that prided itself on its victory over him came to beg him for help. How ironic. The commission president looked at him with a cold expression, but deep down he knew that she feared him, and she did. "It's funny, isn't it?" she said in a tone that was meant to be firm, but which All for One detected as an attempt to hide her own terror. The villain took a step forward, feeling the air change around him. He was no longer chained, no longer sealed, he was now free. "That's the funniest thing I've seen in ages," he replied mockingly, his voice deep and enveloping. "The heroes fought with everything they had to take me down, and now they want me back." The air around him glowed with a crimson flash, a mixture of pure power and utter contempt. "They prefer a demon king in the shadows to a dragon emperor in the heavens." The president didn't respond. It was true, Lord Drakkon had achieved what All for One never could. He had taken over the world in a way that made the rebellion useless. He had destroyed economies, collapsed infrastructure, and uprooted the quirkless, the foundations of society. Without them, the gears of the world stopped turning, and for the world's leaders, the only solution was to revive the ancient villain who nearly doomed them all. All for One began to pace, his mere presence causing the temperature of the place to drop a few degrees. The guards trembled, Nagant stood firm, but his finger trembled on the trigger of his rifle. "Tell me, President," his voice was like a whisper in the darkness, "now that I'm free, what makes you think I'm going to help them?" The woman was unfazed. "Because you can't allow Drakkon to continue existing." A deep, dense, dangerous silence fell between them, and then All for One laughed. What a clever woman. They released the devil to face the dragon. It was true, Drakkon was the only entity in the world that All for One couldn't control. He couldn't steal his power or manipulate it without risking the morphin grid consuming him, and if he couldn't control it, then Drakkon was a real threat to his very existence. Finally, his malicious smile widened. "All right." The wind blew gently over the tower of Island, the imposing fortress that rose above the Pacific Ocean, now transformed into the capital of the quirkless empire. From there, Lord Drakkon watched his people, thousands upon thousands of quirkless, people who were once treated as scum, pariahs, dregs of society, now proudly wearing the armor of the Sentinel Rangers, the invincible army that had conquered the world. At his side, with the grace of a warrior queen, Melissa, both contemplated their people. They were not slaves or subjects, but a people who saw them with absolute devotion. If this were the Lord Drakkon of the past, the one who tried to conquer the multiverse with an army driven by fear, Then this whole thing would be a house of cards ready to collapse. Kimberly betrayed him, Bulk abandoned him, and his own soldiers were waiting for the moment to stab him in the back. But Izuku Midoriya did not rule with fear, he ruled with loyalty, and the roars of approval from his people were proof of that. Lord Drakkon stepped forward and raised a hand. In that instant, silence fell over the crowd. Every man, woman and child awaited his words. Today we have completed what the world never wanted to accept. His voice boomed loudly, amplified by Island's technology. For centuries, we quirkless were treated like trash, like mistakes of nature. Our rights were taken away, our dignity was stripped away, we were left to die in the shadows of a world that saw us as inferior. He looked at each of those present, his gaze intense, full of fire. But we were never weak, we were never useless, we just needed one more opportunity to prove it. Melissa stepped forward and took her place beside him, the same fierceness in her gaze. They took everything from us, and when we decided to take it back, they called us monsters and traitors. Her voice was sharp, filled with suppressed rage. They condemned us, betrayed us, and tried to destroy us, but we are stronger than their hatred. A roar of approval echoed through the crowd. Drakkon looked up to the sky, where Serpentera and the Phoenixerd patrolled majestically, dominating the skies. The world belongs to us. Melissa raised a fist, and they'll never take it away from us again. Cries of joy erupted from the crowd. They were not the cries of frightened subjects, they were the roars of a people who had found a purpose. Drakkon didn't need to use fear, he used faith. His empire wasn't a sandcastle waiting to collapse. It was indestructible, sustained by the will of those who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. After the speech, Melissa and Izuku retired to their chambers at the top of Drakkon Palace, the floating fortress at the heart of Island. The room was more of a laboratory than a bedroom for the rulers of the world, with projectors and monitors displaying the state of the empire, but what really mattered at the moment were the blueprints spread out on the central table, advanced designs of the new Zords in production. Melissa's eyes were fixed on the holograms of the three-dimensional models. We can't yet mass replicate the alloy used in the Dragon Zord, Serpentera, or Tiger Zord, he murmured, still staring at his work. But the technology behind our new models is still centuries ahead of anything the world has ever developed. Izuku watched her with a mixture of admiration and desire. It wasn't just her intelligence that fascinated him, but her determination. The woman who was once just a scientist was now the Phoenix Empress, the mind behind the technological advancement that would ensure her reign. He approached slowly, sliding his hands around her waist before gently kissing her neck. "You always work too hard," he whispered, his voice deep and tinged with satisfaction. Melissa smiled, but before she could respond, a red alert sounded throughout the room. Emergency alarm. Unidentified targets approaching Island. The screens lit up instantly, showing an image they hadn't expected to see so soon. Hundreds of ships advanced in close formation, heading directly for Island. Izuku frowned. Who has the audacity to attack us so quickly? Melissa analyzed the data in real time. It's a makeshift army, heroes, mercenaries, remnants of the Commission, and even some villains. Izuku smiled as he reached for his master morpher. If they wanted to challenge his command, they were welcome to do so. The sound of All for One's boots echoed through the dark, damp halls of Tartaros, once the most infamous and unbreakable prison in the world, now reduced to little more than a waste warehouse. The place reeked of despair, of unrepentant death, of men and women forgotten by the world. But he was no longer one of them. He had been freed and would rule again. He walked with absolute calm, his aura glowing with hunger as he pointed out each prisoner with potential. The guards and the commission chairwoman didn't dare question him. One by one, they were led out of their cells, uncuffed, unrestrained, completely exposed to his presence. Muscular. The door opened, and out came Goto Masuji, better known as Muscular, the mass murderer, still with the same psychopathic smile. He cracked his neck as he looked at him with a mixture of emotion and respect. "Are you going to give me something fun, boss?" he asked, excited, but not challenging. All for One didn't even respond. He simply reached out and absorbed the quirk, feeling his body instantly strengthen, his muscles expand, and energy flow through his veins. Muscular fell to the ground like a broken doll, deprived of his power, useless forever. One less. The guards dragged the criminal's lifeless body away, while All for One continued to advance. Overhaul. Another cell opened, and Kai Chisaki stepped out, his usual cool and arrogant self even without his hands, until he saw All for One. Tisk. Chisaki spat on the ground. Do you really think? He couldn't finish the sentence. All for One's fingers rested on his forehead, and the power of deconstruction and reconstruction flowed into him. All for One's body began to change. His cells, once damaged, were instantly rebuilt. His once disfigured face became young again, smooth, strong. His face, the true face that had once inspired terror, returned. When the flickering light of Tartaros illuminated his reflection, he smiled. It was his face from before All Might crushed him. His voice was deeper, firmer, and his presence was more intense. That's how it should be. Chisaki fell to the ground, his gaze blank, purposeless, powerless. One by one, All for One walked through the cells, mercilessly snatching quirks. Speed, strength, durability, explosive energy, extreme stamina. To face Lord Drakkon, he needed it all. When it was finally over, the remaining prisoners were nothing but corpses. The Tartaros guards and the commission president watched in silence, a mixture of admiration and utter terror. All for One was not only free now, he was stronger than ever, and he looked at the president with an almost mocking smile. Okay, now we're going to kill a dragon. When All for One left Tartaros, the air felt different, thicker and heavier. Not only because of the energy radiating from his rejuvenated body, but because in front of him stood the army assembled by the Hero Commission, thousands of men and women lined up in perfect formation, wearing their military and professional hero uniforms, young and veteran faces, some determined, others afraid, but what they all shared was the desperate need to stop Lord Drakkon. At his side, the president of the commission walked confidently, even though she knew she was no longer the one leading this war. Here is your army, he declared. Thousands of heroes, mercenaries, and soldiers from the remnants of the world's governments, ready to follow you if you give them power. All for One observed them calmly, evaluating their potential. They were not enough, not even with their quirks, nor with the technology of the fallen governments, but they could become something useful. Many of you think you can stop Lord Drakkon with effort and bravery. His voice resonated with absolute coldness. That is ridiculous. An uncomfortable murmur ran through the troops. The Dragon Emperor is not like the enemies you have faced before. He is not governed by the rules of the world and cannot be defeated with conventional force. He paused, enjoying the tension. But I can make them stronger. He raised a hand, and his shadow spread like a dark wave over the nearest soldiers, the marks of his quirk appearing on their bodies as fragments of his power were transferred. A UA student, a third-year boy with potential but without the strength to challenge the gods, screamed as his body glowed with energy. Suddenly, he had two quirks, one of enhanced speed and another of muscle augmentation. His eyes filled with wonder and fear. This power, it's both a blessing and a curse, All for One replied with a crooked smile. Only a select few can carry more than 2 or 3 quirks before their minds collapse. They're not like me, but with this power, they have a chance. More soldiers were chosen, more heroes received duplicate quirks, though their bodies shook with the burden. Some fainted, others resisted, and the strongest felt the adrenaline of a new power running through their veins. Renowned heroes like Best Jeanist, Gang Orca, and some former members of elite agencies were gifted with upgrades, and with each transfer, the loyalties of that army changed, no longer fighting for the commission but now fighting for the Demon King. When he finished, All for One looked up at the sky, where Island floated like an unreachable celestial castle, and smiled in satisfaction. Now we're ready. The plan was in motion. When the surviving guards saw All for One empower his new army, they knew what was about to happen. They'll damn us all, one of them whispered. But the commission president did not hesitate. Better a known demon than the abomination that rules now. And All for One, smiling as he watched them kneel before him as they received more power. The time has finally come to reclaim what is mine. High in the tower, Island's command center, Lord Drakkon watched the enemies approach from the control screen. The Demon King's army was approaching, with All for One at the front, radiating a dark presence. The skies darkened with hundreds of ships, while the heroes and mercenaries now augmented with extra quirks prepared for an all-out invasion. It didn't matter. Izuku smiled confidently and activated his Master Morpher. The air around his body vibrated with pure energy, the Morphin grid answering his call. His suit changed, the white disappearing, replaced by a deep emerald green, and his golden armor transformed. The dragon emblem on his chest shattered and mutated into a dark, empty rhombus, shot through with flashes of black and gold energy. The power emanating from him made the air itself tremble. He looked at Melissa, who was already giving orders from the main console. Activating emergency protocol. His voice was firm and calm, but his gaze was pure fire. He wouldn't allow his people to fall. The evacuation alarm sounded across the island. All civilians to the bunkers. Sentinel Rangers, deploy and prepare for battle. As the system kicked in, Melissa turned to look at Izuku. No words needed, they both knew exactly what they had to do. Izuku reached out and gently caressed Melissa's face, his expression darkening with determination. If you think you can defy me, he clenched his fist, his morpher glowing with raw power, then I'll destroy you. Melissa nodded, and with one last glance at her emperor, turned back to the defense system. Izuku stepped forward and jumped off the tower's balcony. The sky roared as Lord Drakkon launched himself like a green and gold meteor, his silhouette flashing with the energy of the morphin grid. All for One barely had time to react before Izuku's armored fist impacted his torso, generating a devastating sonic shock. The impact sent them hurtling down at a brutal speed, breaking the sound barrier as they fell straight into the ocean beneath the island. When they hit the water, the ocean split in a massive explosion, sending up huge columns of water into what was once the abyss. Lord Drakkon immediately sat up, his posture firm and commanding, his gold and black armor glowing with the energy of the morphin grid, and the empty rhombus on his chest pulsing with flashes of golden lightning. All for One, standing among the waves still falling from the impact, calmly dusted himself off. What a way to welcome. Lord Drakkon smiled beneath his dragon helmet, his eyes cold and calculating. I just wanted to guarantee you a place in hell. The air vibrated with pure energy as the two titans prepared for the final battle. Meanwhile, in the main hangar of Island, Melissa Shield stood at the head of her army. The Sentinel Rangers stood in perfect rows, their black and gold armor gleaming in the hangar lights, thousands of them, quirkless soldiers transformed into the Empire's supreme elite. In front of them, in the distance, All for One's army began its ascent through the skies toward the island. Battleships, heroes with enhanced quirks, and mercenaries hired for the invasion. Melissa placed her Phoenix Morpher on her wrist and activated the system. Morphin time. A golden flare erupted around her body, and her red dress was consumed by a fiery light. When the light dissipated, Melissa Shield was now wearing her Phoenix Ranger outfit, a deep red with gold accents, and her phoenix-headed helmet shone as brightly as a star. Sentinel Rangers, to your Zords. The hangar floor opened, revealing the Zord launch pads. Melissa leapt into the air, landing on the Phoenixzord, her personal war machine, a mechanical colossus with wings of golden fire. Around him, hundreds of Sentinel Rangers boarded their lesser Zords, ready for battle. With one last look at the enemy army, Melissa spread her metallic wings and launched herself into war. The sky was filled with fire and steel and the final battle had begun. To be continued. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and now we will see you in the next video.